Welcome back to the channel Silent Ruptor. You can support the author as he puts a lot of effort. Also don't forget to subscribe to the channel. With that in mind, let's continue Shadow Slave. The nest was spherical in shape, with a round hole at the center of it. Usually, such a nest would be made out of grass and twigs, but this one was constructed from the branches of the great tree, each at least as thick as a man's arm. These branches were twisted and interwoven together in a chaotic pattern, creating gapless, onyx black walls. Sunny had never seen anything like it. Birds were a rare sight in the real world, let alone giant ones. The size of the entrance into the nest was large enough for a small truck to pass through. The nest itself was several times bigger. Wow! For a second, he felt a sense of fear, afraid that the giant bird was somewhere near. But then his fears disappeared. The nest looked abandoned. It was ancient and empty, some of its parts already on the verge of collapse. It was as though thousands of years had passed since anyone had been in this hidden, secretive place. The air was filled with the feeling of lonesomeness and desolation. Makes sense. If I barely managed to pass through the leaves, how would a giant monster do it without leaving a giant hole in the barrier? Sunny hesitated, caution and curiosity wrestling against each other inside his heart. On one hand, exploring ancient nests was not the best of ideas anywhere, let alone inside the dream realm. It posed great risks. On the other hand, it also could lead to a great reward. Plus, wasn't it just too damn interesting? In the end, Sunny decided to climb inside the nest to satiate his curiosity. He had convinced himself that it was safe following an unexpected train of thought. In his warped state of mind, Sunny was convinced that the soul tree was a great and benevolent being, one that protected them from the terrible threats hiding in the outside world. If so, how could anything having to do with the great tree be unsafe? Moving closer to the entrance of the nest, he balanced on the edge of the branch and tried to look inside. However, he wasn't tall enough to see anything except for the inner side of the nest's roof. Since his position was pretty precarious, Sunny decided not to delay the inevitable and jumped, throwing himself up and over the lip of the entrance. A moment later, he landed on a soft surface. The lower part of the nest was covered in a thick cushion of white, silky spiderwebs. Time had made them brittle and pliable like sand. There was so much spiderweb around that, for a moment, Sunny thought that he had fallen into a giant white cocoon. But no, it was just a nest. And there, in the center of it, was a... Sunny blinked. At the center of the nest, there was an egg. A giant, ancient egg that was as tall as he was, gray and seemingly lifeless, as though turned to stone by the passage of time. Forgetting to breathe, Sunny looked around, making sure that there was nothing, and no one, else around. But no, the giant nest was empty and silent, with not even a stray shadow hiding anywhere in sight. How fascinating! Sunny felt strangely excited. The feeling of discovering something incredible, something that no one except for him had ever seen, filled him with a deep sense of wonder and satisfaction. He had never known that there was such a side to him, one full of an explorer's passion. Let's check this thing out. Walking on the soft silk, Sunny slowly circled the massive egg and studied it. At a first glance, it seemed to be made of stone. The surface of the egg was colored in various shades of gray, which were overlaid over each other like moving clouds. This pattern was strangely beautiful, giving the egg a mysterious aura, but overall, it was just big and smooth. Sunny scratched the back of his head, then stepped closer and put his hand on the surface of the egg. Immediately, he felt a strong sense of astonishment. The egg was warm to the touch. Is it still alive? In the next second, Sunny felt a strange pull affecting his core. It was as though the egg was trying to steal his life force. He jerked his hand away and looked at the egg with dark apprehension. The damn thing was not only alive, but also capable of sucking the life out of anything that touched it. It only failed to eat his soul because of one reason. As far as Sunny knew, he was the only existence in two worlds without an actual soul core. He had the mysterious shadow core instead. That's why his life force had not been affected. Phew, that was close. Looking at the giant egg, Sunny thought about how to get back at it. The nest, without a doubt, once belonged to an extremely powerful nightmare creature. Therefore, its spawn was also a being of considerable strength. However, due to some unknown reason, that being had not been able to hatch and was left behind by its parent, destined to remain trapped within the egg for all eternity. Or at least until some unfortunate fool came close enough to feed it with soul essence and give it enough power to break free. Luckily, I'm not a fool. Wait. Maybe I am. His decisions have been very strange lately. He couldn't quite explain some of them, including this latest one. It was as though his thinking ability had been reduced. Whatever. I'm still smarter than a damn egg. Like a true explorer, he went where no one had gone before and made an incredible discovery. He found an unbelievably mysterious, rare being, one that not a single human had ever heard of. Naturally, he had to kill it. That's what the spirit of exploration was all about, wasn't it? Summoning the midnight shard, Sunny thrust it into the stone surface of the egg, causing a rain of sparks to fall on the spiderwebs. The sharp blade slid harmlessly across the stone, leaving only a shallow scratch on it. Tough bastard. The egg was sturdy enough to withstand a strike from an awakened weapon. If it was that resilient, Sunny was scared to imagine how powerful the adult monster would be. It was definitely not an average nightmare creature. But then, he was not an average sleeper. His shadow flowed from his hands onto the midnight shard, turning the polished metal of the blade black and lusterless. Immediately, a cold aura radiated from the sword, making it feel sharp enough to cut the world apart. Stepping forward, Sunny raised the shard above his head and sliced down, delivering a crushing blow. Enhanced by the shadow, the dark blade bit into the stone surface of the egg and split it apart. Cracks ran through the giant stone egg as Sunny's sword plunged into it. A flash of sinister crimson light shined through the cracks, then disappeared, leaving behind nothing but darkness. A torrent of viscous, black liquid flowed onto the white spiderwebs. In the ensuing silence, Sunny heard the spell's bewitching voice. You have slain a great devil, vile thieving bird spawn. Your shadow grows stronger. You have received a memory. Sunny blinked. You have received a memory. Drop of ichor. Wait a moment. A great devil, he gulped. Nightmare creature with 4 soul cores was called a devil, just one class below the dreaded tyrant. From that detail alone, the evil ancient egg had been potentially more powerful than the carapace demon. However, what shocked him the most was its rank, not class. The quality of most things having to do with the nightmare spell followed a similar hierarchy, from dormant to awakened, ascended, transcendent, supreme, sacred and divine. Humans had only ever managed to reach the transcendent rank. These heroes were known as saints, each wielding an unimaginable amount of power and leading humanity in its war against the nightmare creatures. The nightmare creatures, too, were different from each other in a similar fashion, with 7 ranks of power. They were, in order of growing strength, dormant, awakened, fallen, corrupted, great, cursed and unholy. A great devil, therefore, was a nightmare creature with 4 soul cores, each one of the great rank, which were the same in terms of power as a supreme soul core would have been if a human ever managed to pass the 4th nightmare and rise one step above the saints. Sunny had just killed one of the most powerful nightmare creatures to ever fall by a human hand. At least as far as he knew. Victories against the great devils were rare enough to be of historic importance. What a stroke of luck, to find one absolutely defenseless, yet to be fully born and weakened by thousands of years of neglect. Not to mention the fact that he was probably the only human alive to be partially immune to the egg's terrifying life-sucking powers. Wait, how many shadow fragments did I get? Sunny felt stronger, a lot stronger. He was used to receiving 2 fragments for each awakened beast he killed. Thus, it was fair to assume that a fallen beast would give him 4, a corrupted beast would give him 8, and a great beast would give him 16. Forgetting the ridiculousness of the notion that a sleeper would ever be able to slay a great beast. However, the vile thieving bird spawn was not a beast, it was a devil. It had 4 cores, so, 64 fragments. Dumbstruck, Sunny summoned the runes. In his excited state, he even disregarded the insistent forgetfulness that prevented him from doing so earlier. Shadow fragments. 196 1,000ths. After seeing the number, he was giddy with joy at first. But then, Sunny frowned. Wait, that doesn't make any sense. I had 96 fragments before coming to the Ashen Barrow. I received 64 just now, that makes it 160. Where did the additional 36 fragments come from? From the fruits. No way, we've been eating them for less than a week, one fruit a day. To get that much, a whole month would have to pass. But how could so much time pass without him noticing? Yes, his memory was strange lately, but Sunny tried to concentrate on the discrepancy, but it was very hard, for some reason. The more he thought about it, the less clear he became on what exactly he was thinking about. What was I trying to remember? Something about the shadow fragments. Yeah, a few minutes later, he massaged his temples and sighed in frustration. I guess I was trying to calculate how many fragments I got from killing that vile egg. It's 64. What is there to think about? That is great. He would spend more time celebrating the insane amount of shadow fragments he had received, but there was another amazing thing waiting for his attention. A memory. He had actually received a memory from a great devil. A real, actual supreme memory of the 4th tier. That was fantastic. Sunny summoned the runes once more and looked at his memories. Memories. Silver Bell, Puppeteer's Shroud, Midnight Shard, Drop of Ichor. Hurriedly, he concentrated on the new one. Memory. Drop of Ichor. Memory rank. Unknown. Memory type. Unknown. Memory description. The loathsome thieving bird was hated both by the gods and unknown. However, it only cared about shiny things. Enamored by Weaver's beautiful eyes, it stole one of them on a dark, starless night. Impatient, the vile creature looked at its bounty while still in flight. However, when it saw the reflection of unknown forever frozen in the depths of Weaver's pupil, it went mad and screamed, dropping the eye on the mortal realm below. All that was left in its greedy beak was one drop of pure, golden ichor. Sunny frowned. What the hell was that? He had never heard of a memory with an unknown rank and type. How was this even possible? Did the spell really not know, or was it simply refusing to let him know? Why would it do that? And the description itself, what were these words that it failed to translate? He tried to forego the automatic translation and look at the runes themselves, but they were beyond his ability to translate. In fact, he had never seen runes of this type before. Weirdly, studying them caused him to feel dizzy and nauseated. That is, very, very weird. Also, to his shame, Sunny had to admit that he had no idea what the word, ichor, meant. It simply wasn't in his vocabulary. Maybe if he went to school and got an education like other sleepers, he would know. Sunny hesitated for a minute or two, then cautiously summoned the strange memory. Instantly, golden sparks of light appeared in the air in front of him, coalescing into a spherical drop of radiant, golden liquid. What am I supposed to do with tea? Before he finished his thought, the spell spoke again. Its voice sounded a bit strange. It was almost excited. You have acquired a drop of ichor. Do you wish to consume it? Sunny blinked. Consume? A memory? Things were getting weirder and weirder. He hesitated. What was going to happen if he did consume it? Memories were rewards given by the spell to the awakened. As such, they were usually useful, very rarely useless, and never harmful. At least that was the common knowledge. However, this one was out of the ordinary. And it was the spell he was talking about. The damn thing was nothing if not unpredictable, usually with catastrophic consequences. The safest approach would be to put the golden liquid back into his soul sea and never touch it again. But it was a memory received from a great devil. Chances were he would never hold another one in his whole life, not even in his dreams. Sunny was simply unwilling to let this opportunity go. Trying to calm his rapidly beating heart, he licked his lips and said, "Yes, I want to consume it. As you wish." The golden sphere separated into two streams of beautiful, radiant liquid. The streams flowed through the air, approaching Sunny's face. He felt a gentle touch caress his cheeks. Then, the golden liquid reached his eyes and flowed through them, entering his soul through the pupils. Soon, it was gone. Sunny was frozen, not knowing what to expect. A second passed, then another. He raised his trembling hands to his face, finally feeling something. In the next moment, Sunny opened his mouth and let out a terrible, wailing shriek as unimaginable, blinding pain tore through his entire being. Being whose shadows fragments had been absorbed by him. Despite the fact that shadows had no eyes, he couldn't help but feel that they were all staring at him. Silent, motionless, watching. Feeling cold shivers running down his spine, Sunny gulped and stood up, his legs shaking a little. Finding out that a small army of dead shadows had appeared inside your soul sea was not the most pleasant of surprises. Let alone if those shadows once belonged to creatures who you had personally slain. He clenched his teeth. Can I repeat? What the actual hell? The shadows stared at Sunny, and Sunny stared at the shadows. After a while, the situation became a bit awkward. Sunny shifted a little, then hesitantly asked, are you guys not going to do anything? The shadows did not react, remaining as motionless and quiet as they had been from the start. As a matter of fact, he didn't see them move or show any sign of life at all. In that regard, they were even more lifeless than his echo had been here in the Sea of Soul. Sunny scratched his head, his initial fear was slowly disappearing. At first, he was scared out of his wits, but more so from being startled than from feeling an actual threat. This was his soul sea, after all. Very few things could harm him here. Sunny was pretty sure that the shadows were not capable of doing anything, let alone attacking him. They seemed more like manifestations of some weird facet of his aspect rather than actual beings. As such, they weren't dangerous. The question was, why did the shadows suddenly appear? After briefly thinking about it, Sunny came to the conclusion that they did not actually appear, per se. Instead, they were always here, it's just that he had not been able to see them. But now, with his eyes changed by the strange transformation he had gone through, he could, just like he could see the diamond strings inside the puppeteer's shroud. Speaking of the puppeteer's shroud, glancing at the silent shadows one last time to make sure that they would not lunge at him, Sunny frowned with suspicion and turned away. His back instantly began to tingle. Just think of them as fashionable pieces of furniture. Who says soul seas don't need a touch of interior design? Somewhat consoled, he walked closer to the shining spheres that represented memories and summoned the puppeteer's shroud. One of the spheres floated down and slowly dimmed, revealing the armor within. Just like before, Sunny could see 5 glowing nexuses and countless strings permeating the gray fabric. They resembled miniature stars assembled into a constellation. The shroud came from a tyrant, which is a class of nightmare creatures with 5 soul cores. 5 soul cores, 5th tier memory, 5 nexuses, makes sense. For some reason, the number 5 moved something in his mind. Sunny scowled, not understanding the feeling of unease that suddenly appeared out of nowhere and disrupted the flow of his thoughts. Trying to concentrate on the task at hand, he summoned the runes describing the puppeteer's shroud. The familiar description appeared in the air around the armor. Memory, puppeteer's shroud, memory rank, awakened, memory tier, V, memory type, armor, memory description, a worm of doubt. The identification of the tier was new. It seems that the spell decided to be helpful and incorporated Sunny's new understanding of the inner workings of memories into its, interface. Tiers were not something that humans had learned from the spell. Instead, it was just an improvised way of differentiating memories of different power levels within the same rank. It was often unreliable and outright wrong, but it was better than nothing. But in the case of Sunny, the information was 100% true. He could confirm it with his own 2 eyes just by counting the number of core remnants inside a memory. He could even understand their purpose. That might be extremely useful. However, his attention was drawn to something else. At the very bottom of the description, a new cluster of runes appeared. Memory enchantments. Enhanced durability, doubtless. Sunny smiled. That was what he was hoping for. Previously, he had only been able to intuitively sense the special qualities of his memories, with no way to learn their true nature and limits except for the trial and error approach. And using that method during a battle was not conducive to survival. Now, however, he concentrated on one of the enchantments. Enchantment, doubtless, enchantment description, provides the wearer with a small amount of protection against mind attacks. Good to know. The amount was small, because it was just an awakened memory. Since enhanced durability was self-explanatory, Sunny dismissed the puppeteer's shroud and summoned the silver bell. The small bell had only 1 spark of light, which was much less bright than the ones inside the puppeteer's shroud. At that, studying the runes did not show anything interesting. It was a Tier 1 dormant memory with a single enchantment that increased the range at which its ringing could be heard to several kilometers. Finally, it was time to take a look at the Midnight Shard. The graceful blade appeared in front of Sunny in all its austere beauty. Memory. Midnight Shard. Memory rank. Awakened. Memory tier. 3. Memory description. Forged from the shard of a fallen star, this stalwart blade is firm and unyielding. It favors those who are willing to fight to the last drop of blood and knows no surrender. Memory enchantments. Unbroken. Enchantment description. This blade refuses to be broken, and thus is durable beyond reason. It will greatly enhance the power of its wielder when they are close to death, however only if the wielder is unwilling to surrender. Sunny sighed, simultaneously satisfied and disappointed. Now he knew how to access the well of power that hid in the deepest parts of his heart when the Midnight Shard was in his hand. However, it could only be done when he was at the death's door, wounded and minutes away from perishing. It could either save him from a dire situation or create an opportunity for a very heroic last stand. Sunny did not care for heroics, so the second option did not seem appealing at all. The first one was much more useful, but only in the case of him screwing up terribly and getting himself in a lethal amount of trouble. In other words, it could only be used if he failed. In normal battles, the special qualities of the Midnight Shard were of no use at all. A pity, but an ace in your sleeve in case things really go south is not bad either. Done with his memories, Sunny was ready to learn of the new attribute he had received. Considering how much pain he had to go through to acquire the damn thing, he had pretty high expectations. Looking for the cluster of runes representing his attributes, Sunny focused his attention and carefully read their names. There were 5 attributes: Fated Mark of Divinity, Child of Shadows, and the new one, Blood Weave. Sunny was about to summon the description of the Blood Weave but then stopped. Something was not right. Something did not add up. The feeling of unease from before had returned, now much stronger. When did he first feel it? For some reason, his thoughts were slow and murky. He felt a strong inclination to forget all about the strange feeling and concentrate on something else. But this time, he did not. It was, when I was studying the puppeteer's shroud. And it was connected to the number 5. 5. What meaning was there to the number 5? With his attention beginning to wane, Sunny bit his lip, causing drops of blood to roll down. A burst of pain cleared his mind for a moment. There were 5 attributes: Fated Mark of Divinity, Child of Shadows, and Blood Weave. What? There were 5 attributes. But he only counted 4. Bewildered, Sunny stared at the runes. He was sure that there was a 5th attribute. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't read its name and description. Every time his gaze fell on the runes corresponding to the 5th attribute, he would find himself distracted, his memory wiped clean of any mention of it. Just remembering that there were 5 attributes was incredibly hard. Clenching his teeth, Sunny tried to keep his concentration, not allowing himself to be distracted. He was not going to forget. 5. It's 5. There's 5 of them, damn it. Immediately after he said those words out loud, something changed. It was as though an invisible veil had fallen from his eyes. Or, rather, from his mind. Sunny froze, shock and fear permeating his heart. He was remembering. Didn't I see a dream? Yes, of course, he saw Cassie standing over him with panic in her eyes, begging him to remember the number 5. No, wait, was that a dream? At the time, he believed so. But then, he forgot. Just as he had forgotten what actually happened on that day. On the day when Cassie woke him up to tell him something important. It happened on the day they killed the carapace demon. Back then, all 3 of them were utterly exhausted. After moving away from the corpse of the giant creature and finding a good hiding spot, they fell to the ground and immediately fell asleep. But they didn't stay asleep for long. An hour or 2 later, Sunny was shaken awake by Cassie, who was holding him by the shoulders. There was an expression of terror written clearly on her face. Sunny, wake up. Instantly coming back to his senses, he jumped to his feet and summoned the Midnight Shard, afraid that they were under attack. However, there was no one around except for panicked Cassie and wary Nephis, who was in a similar pose, her sword raised and ready to strike. Confused, Sunny looked at the blind girl. Cassie, What's the matter? Grabbing him by the shoulders again, she brought her face close and whispered in a begging tone. Sunny, you have to stop it. Please, you are the only one who can. He frowned, failing to understand what exactly he was supposed to stop. Did she see another vision? Trying to calm her, he said in a measured tone. It's all right, Cassie. Slow down, breathe. Tell us what happened. Start from the beginning. She desperately shook her head. There's no time. I will forget soon. We all will. But you have to remember. We will all forget soon. What does she mean? Not able to see Sunny's dazed expression, Cassie yelled. You have to remember, Sunny. 5. It's 5. Remember. You have to remember. It's 5. Remember. 5. The blind girl was not making any sense. Sunny carefully put his arm around her, feeling how scared she was from her shaking body. All right, Saz. I promise I'll remember. 5. Right. See, it's pretty hard to forget. Neffes was looking at them with a frown, not neglecting to scan the surroundings for any signs of danger from time to time. For some reason, Cassie was only talking to Sunny, not paying her any attention. What was it that she thought Sunny could do, but Changing Star could not? Hearing his answer, the blind girl calmed down a little. However, she was still terrified. Good. Remember, it's 5. You promised. Her voice sounded quieter and quieter, as though she was not sure of what she was saying. Sunny was barely able to discern her mumbling. The more complex a thought, the harder it will be to hold on to it. That's why I can only tell you this one word, the simplest thing to impart. When the right time comes, it might change things. Carefully choosing his words, Sunny hesitantly asked. Cassie, can you tell us what happened, exactly? Hearing his voice, the blind girl flinched and raised her head to face him. There were still traces of fear in her eyes, but mostly, it had been replaced by confusion. Did something happen? Sunny blinked. Wasn't she the one who woke them up in a panic? Wait, why did she wake us up, to begin with? For some reason, he had trouble remembering the details of the past few minutes. The conversation they just had was already hazy in his memory. I guess I'm still groggy from waking up so abruptly. Lack of sleep affects concentration. You wanted to tell us something. It had to do with the, number 5. Cassie raised her eyebrows. 5, why 5? Sunny didn't know what to say. He was going to ask the same question. I have no clue. Perplexed, he looked at Neffes, hoping that she will be able to clear the situation. Changing Star was standing a few steps away with a distracted expression on her face. Sensing his gaze, she stared at him and asked, Why do you have your sword out? Sunny glanced at the midnight shard and tried to remember what had caused him to summon the memory. I'm not sure. Why did you summon yours? Neffes looked down, as though noticing the sword in her hands for the first time. An expression of doubt appeared on her face. What's wrong with our heads today? Understanding that it was pointless to expect help from Neffes, Sunny sighed and turned back to Cassie. Did you see another vision? The blind girl trembled, her eyes opened wide, once again filled with fear. A vision? Yes, I saw a vision. An awful vision. What did you see? She was silent for a few moments, trying to remember. A deep frown appeared on her face. Finally, Cassie quietly said, I saw a mountain of corpses. Countless bodies piled on each other until they formed a blood-soaked hill. And at the top of it, a tiny black seed was floating in a pool of blood. She grew silent, then continued. That was the past, I think. But then I saw the future, a future. It was us. Oh, gods, we were. Her voice trembled, as though not daring to say something aloud. Cassie stopped. Sunny waited for a while, then carefully asked, We were what? The blind girl turned to him in confusion. What? He scratched the back of his head. What were they just talking about? You were, telling us about your vision. I think. Cassie frowned. What vision? To his embarrassment, Sunny wasn't sure either. He just remembered something about the number 5 and a seed. For some reason, he felt as though that number was very important. But why? He had no idea. I forgot. Suddenly, Neffes, who was standing nearby, lowered her hands and dismissed the sword that she had been holding for some reason. Looking at them with a bit of confusion, she hesitantly asked. Why are you guys awake? We need to rest. Something might get attracted by the demon's corpse, so we'd better return to peak condition as soon as possible. Distracted and already forgetting about the conversation with Cassie, Sunny blinked a couple of times, shrugged, and decided to go back to sleep. None of this made sense anyway. They were probably struck dumb by exhaustion. He felt so tired. A few hours later, when the shadow noticed the winged creature circling around the island, he awoke again. By that time, the memory of Cassie's warning was so fragmented and hazy that it seemed like a strange dream. But the seed was already planted deep into his subconscious. And now that it had blossomed, Sunny was finally able to fight through the haze of oblivion and remember everything. Sitting inside the vile thieving bird's nest, Sunny frowned and clenched his fists. Something unnatural was happening to them ever since they came to the Ashen Barrow. Now that he had remembered Cassie's warning, it was apparent that their minds were affected, making them forgetful and easily distracted. Even now that he knew about it, thinking straight was strangely hard. It took all of his will just to keep the knowledge of the anomaly in his memory. The events of these past few days were still hazy. Remembering something else, Sunny closed his eyes in frustration. Had they really spent mere days on this island? The number of shadow fragments he received from eating soul tree fruits suggested otherwise. It was quite possible that as much as a whole month had passed since the first time they ate them. And their minds were corroded a bit more with every day that passed. Pretty soon, there would be nothing left of them at all. Only empty shells, walking around wearing their faces. Sunny's face paled. With a growing feeling of dread, he realized that there were large gaps in his memory. He could not remember how they got to the Ashen Barrow, and where they were going. Other things, too, were unclear and blurry. Stay calm. Despite how compromised his memory was, there were still ways to understand what was going on, and then maybe undo it. After all, he was able to remember Cassie's warning. That meant that their memories were not gone, just obfuscated. First step: resist the impulse to forget everything again. Not succumbing to the constant pull on his mind was not an easy task, but he was able to manage, at least for now. Second step: try to understand the reason why you were able to remember these things. When Cassie begged him to remember the number 5, she must have already known that he would receive a new attribute. He had noticed the existence of the mysterious 5th attribute as the result, which triggered the frightening revelation. However, why was he able to not forget about the existence of the 5th attribute altogether? What made him so special? Cassie had even said that he was the only one who could do it. Why him and not Changing Star? Sunny massaged his temples. Then, a sudden realization came to him. Doubtless, one of the enchantments of the puppeteer's shroud was providing him with a small amount of resistance against mind attacks. That's why he was slightly less susceptible to the frightening forgetfulness that infected them on the Ashen Barrow. That was the reason why he had been the last one to agree to eat the miraculous fruits. Why he had often felt that things were wrong. He was also the only one who had managed to remember Cassie's warning, even if it took him a long time. Cassie knew about the puppeteer's shroud, and that's why she had chosen him instead of Neffy's. Smart girl. So, their warped state was the result of a mind attack. But who could attack them on this desolate island? The answer was pretty obvious. That damned tree. Looking down, Sunny felt cold sweat running down his back. The soul tree was, in fact, a colossal, ancient and utterly horrifying nightmare creature. If he was right, then its power had to be simply unimaginable. He was afraid to even think about what its rank and class were. No wonder it was able to drain a whole area of the crimson labyrinth of all life. No wonder it was able to survive and thrive in this hellish place. Of all the horrors in this hell, it might have been the most terrifying. Finally, Sunny knew the reason why no other nightmare creature dared to approach the Ashen Barrow. Even monsters were afraid of the soul tree. Except for equally harrowing things that dwelled beneath the waves of the deep, dark sea. There was no way for them to destroy it. The soul tree was just too big, old and powerful. For a moment, Sunny entertained the idea of setting it on fire, but quickly abandoned it. He would need a volcanic eruption or some sort of divine intervention to burn that colossus down. So, what to do? After thinking for some time, Sunny decided not to be hasty and move forward one step at a time. First, he had to know the exact situation with his attributes. Summoning the runes, he tried once again to read the description of the hidden fifth attribute. The result was the same. He knew it was there, but could not remember what it was no matter how much he tried. Figures. Confirming that it was still impossible for him to solve that mystery on his own, Sunny moved his attention to the Mark of Divinity. New runes appeared under its description. Mark of Divinity attribute description. You bear a faint scent of divinity, as though someone briefly touched by it once, a long time ago. Mark of Divinity is ready to evolve. Proceed. Not wasting time, Sunny said, yes. Immediately, the name and the description of the attribute changed. The new runes read, attribute, Spark of Divinity. Spark of Divinity attribute description. Every fire starts from a spark. Somewhere deep within your soul, a radiant spark shines with divine light. He didn't feel any changes within himself. It seemed as though the question of whether or not he wanted to proceed was just a formality, and the attribute already evolved back when he had consumed the drop of ichor. My affiliation to divinity has increased. Neat. Although I'm not sure how it might be useful. Was that spark of divinity the reason why he was now able to see the inner workings of memories, as well as some other stuff like the shadows in his soul sea? If so, was it a universal trait of all awakened with high divine affiliation, or just his? For some reason, Sunny felt that it was the latter option. He had received the drop of ichor from a being called Weaver, and then became able to see the strings that were weaved through the memories, giving them their unique qualities. It wasn't hard to see the connection. If this was true, did it mean that there were different kinds of divinity? And he inherited a small amount of a very special kind of divinity. Was Weaver even a deity? Every god he had heard about was named in a similar fashion. There was Shadow God, War God, well, that's it. He had never heard the names of any other god. However, Weaver's name was different. Maybe Weaver was not a deity at all. Maybe it was actually one of the unknown. Sunny shook his head, feeling that he had almost allowed himself to get distracted and release the hold on his memory. He could not allow himself to go on tangents now. Concentrating, he looked at his new attribute, Blood Weave. Blood Weave attribute description. You have inherited a part of Weaver's forbidden lineage. Your blood has been altered and imbued with odd tenacity. So, he would be less likely to bleed out in the future. That was a very nice enhancement. However, it did not help Sunny with his current situation. It was time for the next step. It was early morning when Sunny descended from the soul tree. However, he didn't bring any fruit with him. Walking over to sleeping Cassie, he took her by the shoulders and gently shook her awake. The irony of how this situation mirrored the one where Cassie had told Sunny to remember the number 5 was not lost on him. The blind girl slowly came to her senses and turned to face him with a sleepy, confused expression. Sunny, why are you up so early? He hesitated, then said with a friendly smile, trying very hard to act as though everything was all right. Actually, I didn't sleep at all this night. Cassie frowned. Luckily, she could not see the sorry state he was in, nor the dried blood on his face. Really? Why? He shrugged. I decided to climb the soul tree and search for some fruits. But that's not very important. Hey, your aspect ability allows you to see other people's attributes, right? She nodded, still confused. Yes, you know this. Why? Sunny lingered, then said in a carefree tone. Can you take a look at mine? Sunny's thought process was very simple. Honestly, in the state he was in, complex ideas that went against Soul Tree's indoctrination were almost impossible to hold on to. He was already at his limits just trying to remember what had happened in the giant nest. On his way down, Sunny had to bite himself several times, leaving bloody marks on his hands. Sharp pain cleared his mind for a few moments and gave him temporary relief from the constant pull of forgetfulness. Coincidentally, he was already noticing the effect Blood Weave was exerting on him. The bites only bled for a short while, quickly turning into scabs. The speed of coagulation of his blood was clearly enhanced. He also felt more energetic, his endurance substantially better than it had been before. Which made sense. The human body was a system where every part affected the other. A comprehensive improvement of one of these parts, especially one as important as blood, had to lead to a chain reaction of lesser improvements throughout the system. It seemed that he had severely underestimated the importance of his new attribute. Focus, idiot, no tangents. Gritting his teeth, Sunny concentrated on the task. He wanted to use Cassie's aspect ability to learn the truth of the hidden attribute. Her sight was different from his. Sunny could only see the information provided by the runes because it was a default function of the spell. He simply accessed that information with his mind. Cassie's sight, however, came from her aspect. Thus, even if their minds were compromised, it should not have affected her ability to see other people's attributes. She also had a high affinity to revelations and fate. So, there was a high chance that Cassie would be able to succeed where he had failed. Finally reaching the ground, Sunny woke the blind girl up and, after a short conversation, mentioned the attributes. Then, he carefully asked, "Can you take a look at mine?" Cassie was visibly confused by this question. "Can't you do it yourself?" Sunny smiled. "I can, but I think you'll be surprised when you see them." The blind girl hesitated, then shrugged. "All right, but if it turns out that you woke me up for nothing, I'll be pretty upset." "That was not very nice of you." She turned to face him and froze for a moment, as though staring into his eyes. Fated, child of shadows, spark of divinity, wait, wasn't it, mark, of divinity? Huh, I must have remembered wrong. Stopping for a second, Cassie shyly covered her mouth with her small hand and yawned. My memory has not been too good lately. Too much rest, I guess. Where was I? Oh, yes, blood weave. Huh, where did this come from? Sunny forced a chuckle. This thing, from an egg. Anyway, is there something else? Cassie blinked a couple of times. An egg? Well, if you say so. Usually, an appearance of a new attribute was not something one would gloss over. But in the state she was in, Cassie's attention span was severely reduced, and her mental capacity was clouded. She just frowned for a second, then forgot all about the discrepancy. Sunny's heart, meanwhile, was beating like it was going to explode. With a fake smile frozen on his face, he waited for the blind girl's next words. They were going to decide whether or not he would be able to get to the bottom of things. And, therefore, find a way to rise from that bottom. With an absent-minded smile, Cassie said, "My mom makes the best eggs." What were we talking about? Right, your attributes. The last one is enthralled. Wait, where did this? Knowing that there was very little time, Sunny hurriedly asked. The description. What does the description say? A bit of tension sipped into his voice. Startled by this intensity, Cassie didn't ask the same question again and simply said, "You've been mesmerized by the ancient fiend, soul-devouring tree, and are being turned into its thrall. Once the process is complete, there will be no escape." As soon as Sunny heard these words, it was as though heavy chains fell from his mind. Suddenly, his memories returned in an avalanche, making him stagger. His eyes opened wide. Only now that he had fully recovered his memory did Sunny realize the extent to which his mental state was warped, how much of his true self was gone, how close he came to being completely obliterated without even knowing that a terrible monster was slowly devouring his mind. An extreme feeling of terror filled his heart. For a few moments, Sunny lost the ability to speak, covered in cold sweat and shaking. "See, calm down, calm down. It didn't happen, you stopped it. You're back, it didn't eat you." Slowly, he was able to get a grip on his feelings and achieve some semblance of composure. He came very close to the edge, but did not take the last step. He was still himself. It wasn't over yet, they still had a chance. Looking at Cassie, Sunny slowly exhaled and said, "Thank you." The blind girl smiled and raised her eyebrows. For what? She had already forgotten all about their conversation. Sunny was free from being mesmerized by the soul devourer, but Cassie was not. Her memory, mind and thinking were still compromised. Turning worse as they spoke. A pained smile appeared on Sunny's face. Struggling to keep his tone light and cheerful, he said, "For helping me out just now. Sorry about waking you up so early, go back to sleep. I'll take it from here." Cassie hesitated for a few moments, then got distracted and forgot that he was there at all. Yawning, the blind girl lay down and covered herself with her cloak. Soon, she was asleep again, happy and blissfully ignorant of the fact that her days were numbered. Sunny watched her for a while, a grim expression on his face. Finally, he turned and walked away, thinking. Over my dead body. Neffys was still at the western edge of the island, gazing over the receding black waters. It seems as though she barely moved since the last time Sunny saw her. Looking at her with clear eyes, free from the most debilitating effects of being enthralled, he was able to notice things that he had not noticed before. Neff's hair was indeed longer. Back at the academy, it was short and usually parted to the side. Now silver strands were already long enough to cover her ears, hanging messily without their usual luster. Changing Star's face seemed much thinner, with dark circles under her eyes and a bleak, dull expression. Her usual confidence and energy were gone, replaced by exhausted stillness. She looked as though some unknown illness was consuming her from inside, slowly turning the once radiant girl into a pale shadow of her former self. Sunny suspected that he knew what that illness was. He had known for a long time that Neffys had a mysterious goal, and that her determination to achieve that goal was nothing short of frightening. That burning desire of hers, it seemed, was strong enough to resist even the enthrallment of the soul devourer. However, while the feelings remained, the actual memories were gone. Thus, Neffys had been left longing desperately for something that she did not know, with no way to understand the nature of her emotions or satiate them. This inner conflict was the reason for her terrible state. Coming closer, Sunny sat down and looked at Neff, wishing to see her striking gray eyes shine once again with unbreakable resolve. "Hey, Neff," she turned her head to him, not saying anything. Sunny gritted his teeth, feeling dark anger blossoming in his heart. "That loathsome tree, I have something to tell you." Trying to stay calm and not miss anything, he told Neffys everything that he had found out. He told her about his trip to the upper parts of the soul tree, the giant nest he had discovered, the vile thieving bird spawn and how he had killed it, the strange memory with no rank and type, the new attribute he had received and the hidden one he had accidentally discovered. Finally, Sunny told her about the nature of that attribute, the true nature of the soul devourer, how long they had been on the island, and what they had forgotten. When he finished, Changing Star's expression didn't change one bit. Looking away, she simply said, "I see." Sunny blinked. I see, that's all you have to say." She glanced at him and smiled darkly. "What do you want me to say?" He gaped at her and clenched his fists. "Wow, how horrible. Good job, Sunny. Say something, at least. Is it so hard to behave like a human?" She turned away, not answering. Sunny stared at her for several seconds, then said in a tired, defeated voice, "I don't know what to do. Tell me what to do, Neff. How do I get us out of this?" She was silent for a while. Sunny almost assumed that Changing Star had already forgotten everything that he had told her, but then he noticed sparks of white radiance dancing in the depths of her eyes. Neffys had activated her aspect ability, using pain to stay lucid for as long as possible. Finally, she looked at the retreating dark sea and said, "We need to build a boat." Sunny blinked. "What?" Changing Star sighed and turned her face to look at him. "We've been here, on this island, for many weeks. Our minds are slowly being erased by the soul tree, turning us into its slaves. Forever. However, the process is not complete." He nodded, listening. "What thoughts did the soul tree put in our heads? That it is benevolent and great. That its fruits are desirable. And that we shouldn't leave the island, staying as close to it as possible. The first two commands make perfect sense. The third, however, is not so simple." Neffys gestured at the vast expanse of black water. "From that third command, we can deduce that the effect of the soul tree's enthrallment weakens with range. And that if we put enough distance between ourselves and the tree, it will be broken." Sunny's face brightened when he understood Neff's logic. So there was a way. They just had to leave the ashen barrow and flee, not looking back until the soul devourer's brand was gone from their souls. However, but why a boat? Why not just run away on foot? Changing Star lowered her head and said quietly, "We'll never make it to the castle on foot. We'll just die. I was too arrogant before to think, well, it doesn't matter now. It will take many months to go around the crater through the labyrinth, especially now that we don't have the echo. And every day we spend there is another day we risk encountering something that will kill us without even breaking a sweat. She sighed. We were already lucky to survive for as long as we did. But in the end, no matter how much we fought and persevered, we still encountered the soul tree. This should have been our end. Do you know how improbable it is that we even got a chance to have this conversation? Sunny hesitantly shook his head. First, we had to have an oracle in our group to see the future. Then, Cassie had to formulate and execute an ingenious plan in the short amount of time her memory remained intact. That plan was based on the fact that there was someone with an awakened armor of 5th tier in our group, one enchanted with the extremely rare mind protection trait, no less. Awakened with the revelation affinity were few and far between. Sleepers with a memory equal to the puppeteer's shroud were even rarer. That person then had to find and kill a great devil. More incredibly, he had to receive an actual lineage memory from it. Do I need to explain how implausible this combination of events is? Sunny slowly shook his head. Neffys closed her eyes. My point is, if we go into the labyrinth, we will inevitably meet the next soul tree, and even if we miraculously manage to survive that encounter, there will be the next, and then the next. Sooner or later, we will die. She looked west, where the last remnants of the dark sea were disappearing beyond the horizon. But if we build a boat and use Cassie's staff to fill the sail with wind, maybe we'll be eaten by the dwellers of the depths, or maybe they won't pay us any attention at all. It's a gamble either way. Either we die, which is the same as returning to the labyrinth, or not. If we survive, we'll be able to travel 100, maybe even 200 kilometers in one night. More distance than we had covered so far. Sunny froze, stunned by that number. In all the weeks preceding their battle with the carapace demon, they had traveled for no more than 100, maybe 150 kilometers from the giant knight's statue. It was a considerable amount, especially because of how hard each step through the Crimson Labyrinth had been. To travel as much, perhaps even more in a single day, that would have been incredible. But, sail, on the dark sea. Suddenly, he felt very cold and small. Trying to gather his courage, Sunny looked into the distance and said in a raspy voice. You've seen the creatures that dwell under these waves. Do you really want to swim across them? Changing Star was silent for a few seconds, then sighed. We are damned either way, Sunny. What do we have to lose? She fell silent for a moment and grimaced, pale flames dancing in her eyes. Then, in a quiet voice, she added. We will not light any fires, relying on your eyes to guide us west. We will hope that Cassie's armor will protect us. Maybe it will be enough. Sunny glanced at Neff and asked. What's so special about Cassie's armor? She hesitated for a moment, then answered without looking at him. It's a Tier 6 awakened memory. One of its traits is to make the wearer less likely to draw the enemy's attention. While Sunny was digesting this information, Neffy suddenly trembled. Closing her eyes, she said through gritted teeth. I am at my limit. My mind is fading. If you have any questions left, better ask them fast. He blinked, startled. Then, knowing that there was not much time left, Sunny asked the first thing that came to his mind. Do you even know how to build a boat? Changing Star simply nodded, letting him know that she did. Her expression was slowly turning lost and dull again. Racing against time, Sunny frantically thought of another question. How do I convince you to leave the island once your memory is gone? Neffys looked at him, struggling to hold onto the last shreds of lucidity. For a moment, her eyes became clear again. White flames ignited in their depths, illuminating her pale, beautiful face. Aster, Song, Vale, say those words to me, and I will listen. Starting to lose the grip on her thoughts, she turned away and added after a short pause, her voice steady and even. If anything happens, take Cassie and flee. Don't. Then, the light in her eyes slowly dimmed, and soon, Changing Star was staring west once again, all memory of their conversation gone from her mind. Sunny sat by her side for some time, waiting. After a while, he shifted a little and said, Hey, Neff. She turned to him, her face bleak and full of confusion. Sunny, oh, when did you get here? A while ago. Then, he smiled and said in a carefree tone, Hey, can I ask you something? Do you know how to build a boat? Nefis was very surprised by his question, but eventually agreed to help him. Sunny didn't tell her why exactly he wanted to build a boat, dodging the questions with practiced finesse. His flaw was not making things easy, but with the state Nef was in, persuading her was not very hard. Manipulating her felt a little strange, but explaining everything once again would have taken too much time. Not to mention that he wasn't sure that it would work again. And there was not much time left. With every hour, their condition worsened. Even Sunny was having trouble keeping his lucidity intact. Every time he felt that his mind was beginning to slip, he had to inflict pain on himself to get a few moments of reprieve. Even so, his thoughts were slow and fragile. Keeping them together was taking a heavy toll on him. They had to flee the island as soon as possible. Sunny was determined to be ready by the time the Dark Sea returned. Turning away from Nefis to not let her see the pained expression on his face, Sunny bit his hand once again. Feeling the bitter taste of blood on his tongue, he let the wave of pain clear his mind and blinked, amused at the irony of the situation. He was gnawing on himself to prevent himself from being eaten. What a funny contradiction. Hiding his bleeding hand behind his back, Sunny turned to Nef and asked, "So, how are we going to make the boat?" She thought about it for some time, then said indifferently, "We will have to use the materials at hand. For the hull, we will have to use the dead demon's carapace. We can strip several armor plates of suitable shape and tie them together with the golden rope." Sunny raised his eyebrows. The carapace demon's armor. It's made out of some strange steel. Can steel even float?" Nefis glanced at him with reproach. "Anything can float, Sunny. You just have to make sure that you're displacing more water than the weight of the floating object. That's how boats work." He blinked. "Ah, okay. About the sail, I think we can ask Cassie to lend us her cloak." "What do you think?" Changing Star gave him a strange look. "I mean, yes, I still don't understand what got you so excited about boat building, but I'm sure she'll be willing to help you out with this, passion project." Sunny smiled. "Great, let's go butcher the demon, then." A strange sentence to say with a smile, but not the strangest one he had to say to convince Nef to help him. A few minutes later, they reached the giant carcass of the carapace demon. It was towering above them like a small hill of polished metal. After that first day when the strange winged abominations had circled around the island for several hours, never daring to approach, nothing else had shown up to lay claim to the fearsome creature's meat. As the result, the carcass was largely intact. Strangely, the demon's corpse had not begun to rot. Only the metal of its carapace slowly deteriorated, losing its luster and shine, then turning less and less durable. By now, its surface was marred by large patches of rust. Nefis climbed up on top of the carcass and walked from side to side, looking under her feet. Then, she gestured at several spots. "These curved plates will be perfect if we can fit them together tight enough. Each one is long enough to form the entirety of the hull, leaving enough space for the three of us to sit side by side." Sunny had no knowledge of shipbuilding, so he decided to trust her judgment. Looking up from the ground, he asked, "What about the mast?" Changing Star scowled. "That, I will have to think about." Sunny smiled. "All right, while you're thinking, I'll go fetch Cassie to keep you company." Sunny had a lot to do before the sunset. The parts of the plan spun in his head, making it ache. He had to constantly remain focused, straining his will to its limits, just to keep himself from forgetting everything. When it was not enough, he had to use pain to augment his concentration. His hands and arms were covered in ghastly bite marks. Without the blood weave, Sunny might have fainted from blood loss already. Still, with his pale face turning even whiter from exhaustion and feverish light burning in his eyes, he must have looked like a zombie. Luckily, Cassie couldn't see any of it. It didn't take much to convince her to join their strange endeavor. The blind girl's state was way worse than his or Nef's. She seemed to be barely holding on, her thoughts slow and meek. Sunny's heart was gripped with worry. Why is she affected so much more than us? Is it because we have true names, but she does not? Names were anchors of one's sense of self, after all. Could it be that true names served a similar role, only in matters having to do with the spell? He didn't know. Sunny guided Cassie to the carcass of the carapace demon. Nefis was already busy stripping plates of armor from its back. Her silver sword was seemingly able to cut through the deteriorated metal, making the task not as hard as he had been afraid of. Gently sitting the blind girl down in a spot where Neff could see her, he climbed atop the dead demon and evaluated the progress of Changing Star's work. She looked at him with a frown. "Aren't you going to help? This was your idea, after all." Sunny shrugged. "Maybe later. You seem to be enjoying yourself, anyway. Some people might say that it's a fun little project to chase the boredom away, right?" She blinked a couple of times, then said, "I guess." Sunny nodded a couple of times, looking down at the spots where, stripped of armor plates, the demon's flesh was laid bare. The azure blood had coagulated, turning it dark and as hard as stone. Here and there, though, white layers of fat remained in pristine condition. "Actually, I have another project in mind." Neffes raised an eyebrow. "Oh really?" Sunny summoned his sword and stepped closer to the gap in the creature's armor. "Yeah, I want to make a candle." Saying those words, he began to cut, separating the fat from the hardened muscle tissue. Neff blinked a few times and then looked at Cassie. "Hey, Saz, has Sunny lost his mind?" The blind girl perked up at the sound of her name. I'm not sure. I think he's just bored." Sunny concentrated on his task, not paying them any attention. For a moment, he entertained the idea of cutting himself with the Midnight Shard's razor-sharp blade, but then dismissed it. Cutting through the puppeteer's shroud would have been really hard, and he couldn't dismiss the armor in front of the girls. Well, to be more precise, he didn't want to. With a sizable chunk of the demon's fat in his hands, Sunny jumped down from the carcass and landed on a pile of fallen leaves. Making a candle out of animal fat was not very hard. He just needed fire, water, and time. The wick could be made out of seaweed fibers. It was not going to be pretty, but he didn't care about aesthetics. Leaving Neffes and Cassie behind, Sunny rushed back to their camp. The sun was already high in the sky. He spent the rest of the day doing two things: watching over the process of making the candle and running around the island, gathering as much fallen leaves as he could. From time to time, he would catch a glimpse of Neffes working on the boat, sometimes instructing Cassie to help her with menial tasks. From what he could see, the boat was coming along nicely. Changing Star knew what she was doing. Of course, this was only possible because he had convinced her that this was just something he wanted to do for fun. And the girls knew that Sunny was planning to use the boat to escape the Ashen Barrow. The effects of enthrallment would have kept erasing their memories of the task, making finishing it impossible. As it stood, Sunny was the only one who knew the true purpose of the boat. That's why he was forced to bear the full weight of Soul Tree's mind corruption alone. He felt as though he was about to drop dead of exhaustion. His head felt like it was filled with molten iron. His vision was starting to become blurry. But, stubbornly, Sunny refused to give up. No matter how tired he was, how much he wanted to let go and ease this suffering, returning to the bliss of not knowing, he kept his thoughts on one goal, and one goal only: escaping the clutches of the Soul Devourer. Finally, with the evening approaching, the boat was ready. Looking like a walking corpse, Sunny slowly approached the demon's carcass, which was now cut open and sliced apart. It was as though a mad vivisector had visited the island to perform an autopsy on the giant and forgot to sew the poor creature back up. Neffes looked at him with concern. "Sunny, are you all right?" Giving her a crooked smile, he shrugged. "I'm fine, comparatively." He did not specify what exactly he was comparing his current condition to. Turning his head, Sunny looked at the boat with dark satisfaction. It was not how he had imagined it. The hull was made out of curved plates of polished metal, with sharp spikes protruding from them in all directions. The plates were held together by the golden rope that was tied tightly around them. Changing Star had managed to make the gaps between the different parts of the hull so thin that no water could sip through. The mast was made out of the demon's spine and ribs, with Cassie's enchanted cloak hanged on them to serve as the sail. There was even a steering oar, fashioned out of the tip of the giant's scythe. He had expected to see a makeshift raft, but what met him was an actual vessel. Yes, it looked crude, but also strong, eerily macabre, and strangely impressive. Sailing upon the cursed sea on a boat made of demon bones, sound like the beginning of a legend, he thought, temporarily mesmerized by the ghastly visage of the carapace vessel. Nephi's looked at him with a hint of satisfaction. Happy. Now what? Sunny gathered his thoughts. Now, as soon as he tried to think of what they had to do next, an invisible barrier appeared in his mind, blocking any attempt to continue that thought. Now no matter how hard he tried, Sunny couldn't quite remember what he wanted to do. With a scowl, he raised his hand and bit down on his mangled palm, feeling drops of blood flowing into his mouth. But even that pain did not help him destroy the barrier. Sunny smiled darkly and kneeled, placing his hand on the ground. Summoning the midnight shard, he raised his other hand and brought the pommel of the sword down without any hesitation. As the brittle bones of his ring finger shattered from the powerful strike, a wave of agony washed over his mind, obliterating the adamantine barrier. Now we get the hell out of here. Nephi stared at Sunny, shocked by his sudden act of self-mutilation. Hissing through gritted teeth, he dismissed the midnight shard and slowly rose back to his feet. Ah, crap, that really hurts. His poor finger was red and swollen, pulsating with sharp pain. It was unmistakably broken. Sunny was so full of self-pity that he wanted to cry. Why am I so unlucky? First that nightmare in the nest, now this. How come no one else is suffering, just me? He conveniently decided to forget that Changing Star had been literally torturing herself for weeks and that due to her blindness Cassie was always covered in bruises. Hearing his pained voice, the blind girl turned her head and asked. Sunny, what happened? He grimaced and tried to smile. It's nothing serious, really. I just, sort of, smashed my hand a bit. Nephi's opened her mouth to say something, but he hurriedly interrupted whatever she wanted to say. Anyway, Neph, can you help me drag this gruesome masterpiece of yours to the edge of the island? At this point, one wrong question could make things very complicated. He didn't want to reveal the true purpose of his actions until the last moment. That way, he would have more leeway in how to deal with problems, should any arise. Changing Star hesitated. A few seconds later, she shrugged, looking at him with a concerned frown. Are you sure you're okay, Sunny? He forced a smile. I will be if you help me. Giving up, she shook her head and walked over to the front of the boat. Sunny turned to Cassie. We're off, Saz. Wait here for a bit, alright? I'll come get you soon. She lingered, as though not quite understanding his words, then answered with an uncertain expression. Okay. Sunny raised his healthy hand to grip her shoulder, then hesitated and turned away with a dark look in his eyes. Enduring the pain, he walked toward the boat. Hold on a little more, Cassie. It will be over soon, I promise. The night was already approaching. Sunny and Nephi's dragged the boat across the island, pulling it as oxen yoked to a wagon. The ashen sand was not the most difficult of terrains, but the spikes on the strange vessel's hull were making the task harder. Thankfully, the boat was lighter than it looked. Sunny knew that the alloy of the demon's carapace was extremely light from his experience with the midnight shard, which was forged from the same lustrous metal. If he were to believe the sword's description, this miraculous alloy came from a shard of a fallen star. Whether this omen was good or bad, he didn't know. Soon, they heard a thundering rumble in the distance. It came from the direction of the colossal crater. The dark sea was awakening. Gritting his teeth, Sunny grabbed onto the golden rope that was coiled around his chest and pulled harder. Come on, faster. The sun was just about to touch the horizon when they finally reached the edge of the island. Falling to his knees, Sunny released the rope and gasped for air, his chest rising and falling frantically. A wave of overwhelming exhaustion was drowning his senses, making it hard to stay awake. Not yet. You can't let go yet. Nephi's was silent, looking at him with a frown. For once, Sunny felt glad that she was weirdly taciturn by nature. Gathering his strength, he stood up and glanced at the darkening sky. Time was running out. Turning to Neph, he strained his parched throat and said in a raspy voice. I'll explain everything once Cassie is here. Don't go anywhere until I bring her, alright? Please. Changing Star stared at him for a few seconds, then shrugged with indifference and didn't say anything. I'll take it as a yes. What else could he do? Cursing under his breath, Sunny turned around and hurried away. He had one last task to accomplish before returning for Cassie. Some time later, he came back to the spot where he had left Cassie. The blind girl was still there, sitting some distance away from the carapace demon's carcass and idly staring into the ground. Hearing the sound of his approaching footsteps, she smiled weakly. "Sonny." He walked over, tired to the bone, and said while trying to keep his tone casual. "Yeah, it's me." Cassie got distracted for a moment, then asked, "Do you have a fruit?" "I'm hungry." He flinched, then shook his head. "No, listen, we need to. I'm hungry. Do you have a fruit?" Sonny stopped, looking at the blind girl with a forlorn expression. She sounded like a broken doll, repeating the same phrase over and over. Her condition wasn't good. He licked his lips. "Come with me, and your hunger will disappear." This was the best misdirection he could come up with within the confines of his flaw. However, this time, he failed to achieve the desired effect. Cassie smiled and said, "Really, you'll take me to the fruits?" Due to his exhaustion and the debilitating effect of the enthrallment, Sonny got distracted for a moment and failed to control the flaw. Without realizing it, he opened his mouth and said, "No." Cassie pouted and lowered her head. "That's not nice, Sonny. Why did you lie to me?" Still reeling from his mistake, Sonny missed the moment and made things even worse, turning a small oversight into a real problem. "Because I want to take you away from this cursed island." As soon as the words left his mouth, Sonny froze and opened his eyes wide, refusing to believe that he had just messed up that bad. However, the damage was already done. Cassie turned to him with a deep scowl. "Take me away, but I don't want to leave." "Why would I leave the soul tree?" Sonny silently cursed and shouted, abandoning any attempt to control himself. "Because that thing is evil. It's pure goddamn nightmare. Come on, let's go." Grabbing her hand, he tried to pull the delicate girl away, but she resisted with surprising strength. "Let go of me, you jerk." Cassie managed to rip her hand away from his grip and flinched back, looking at Sonny with anger. "I said I don't want to go. You're acting strange, Sonny. Stop, please." Sonny froze, not knowing what to do. This island is our home. It's so nice here, with the three of us together. Why do you want to leave?" He lingered, struggling to do what he knew had to be done. Finally, Sonny gritted his teeth and said, "Because it's 5. Remember, I'm sorry, Cassie." Then, he lunged forward and violently grabbed the blind girl, easily suppressing her resistance. "What are you doing? Stop. Help, help, Neff." Throwing her over his shoulder, Sonny turned around and ran toward the edge of the island. Cassie resisted desperately, using her small fists to pummel his back with a rain of punches. Despite the fact that she had never taken part in battles against the nightmare creatures of the Forgotten Shore, she still was considerably stronger than a normal person. All those soul shards Changing Star had shared with her gave Cassie enough strength to make Sonny feel every strike. It wasn't enough to seriously injure him, but more than enough to hurt like hell. "I'm sorry, I'm really sorry, Cassie." Deeply disturbed, Sonny tried to block out Cassie's desperate screams and rushed to the boat. His forehead was covered in cold sweat. As the last glimmers of light were disappearing from the sky, he finally returned to the edge of the island. The ghastly boat was silently standing on the sand, just a few meters away from the restless black water. Changing Star was resting just in front of it, raising her head to look at the source of the commotion. "Neff, help." Sonny had gone crazy. Neffy slowly rose to her feet, her indifferent expression radiating coldness. She slightly outstretched one hand. "Crap, wait, it's not." Before he could finish the sentence, the silver sword appeared out of thin air, aimed at the ground. "For now. Explain yourself." Changin' Star's voice was even and calm, but Sonny could feel the hidden threat in it. Suddenly, he saw her in a new light, or, rather, in an old one. As a potential enemy, the idea of facing off against Neffy sent chills running down his spine. He had almost forgotten the feeling he got back in the academy, watching her wipe the floor with most of the sleepers in their batch. He had forgotten that she, too, was a monster. Licking his lips, Sonny cautiously said, "It's not as you think, Neff. We've been caught in a trap by the soul tree. It's not benevolent, it's not protecting us. In fact, it's doing the opposite. If we don't leave this island, we'll become its slaves, forever. Or until it finds someone stronger and devours us." She tilted her head and looked at him with an unreadable expression. Come on, Neffys, remember, we've talked about this already. This whole thing was your idea to begin with. For a moment, he thought that his words had awoken the stolen memories in her mind. But her response shattered those hopes into pieces. Leave the great tree. You have really lost your mind. Curses. Changing Star raised her sword and said in a tone that made Sunny tremble. Let Cassie go. Now. He hesitated, thinking about the best course of action. Then, he carefully placed the blind girl on the ground. All right, I did. See. Now, listen to me. I have something very important to tell you. Before he was done speaking, Neffys disappeared from his view. Realizing that he was about to be attacked, Sunny prepared to defend himself. However, a moment later, he was already lying on the ground, the tip of the silver sword pressed against his throat. Changing Star was standing above him, pale lights burning in her eyes. Well, that was embarrassing. All his training, all the experience he had won in countless bloody battles, all the power he had gained, Sunny had really thought that he stood a decent chance of standing his ground in a fight against Neffys, maybe even reaching a tie. But in the end, he had only lasted a second. One would be tempted to call this shameful display a premature capitulation. Nice one, idiot. Now stop fooling around and focus. Feeling the cold steel touching his skin, Sunny tried to move as little as possible. He was pretty sure that Changing Star wouldn't just kill him in cold blood, but it was still better to not give her any reasons to do something drastic. After all, Neff's mind was not all there. Looking up at her cold, indifferent face, Sunny strained his vocal cords and shouted in exasperation. Aster, Song, Vale. Neffys's hand trembled, making a drop of blood roll down his neck. Her eyes opened wide, full of surprise and shock. Then, a dark expression appeared on her face. Pressing slightly on the sword, she took a step forward and pierced him with a burning gaze. When she spoke, her voice was trembling with suppressed emotions. How do you know these names? Who are you? Sunny blinked, equally as surprised by her reaction. He had thought that these weird words were just a part of some code to jog her memory awake. But, as it turned out, they were not. Aster, Song, Vale, what the hell does it mean? What can make Neffys lose her cool? It has to be something important. Trying to stay as still as possible, he cautiously glanced at the blade of the sword and honestly answered. I didn't even know that these were names. It's just what you told me to tell you in case you forget what had to be done. You said if I tell you this, you'll listen to me. Neffys stared at him, a shadow of doubt appearing on her face for a split second. It was gone almost instantly, replaced by grim determination. Gritting her teeth, she snarled. Which domain do you belong to? Sunny had no clue what she wanted him to say. So, he just asked. What's a domain? She grinned, a maniacal glimmer appearing in her eyes. This was very unlike calm, composed Neffys. If Sunny didn't know better, he would think that a completely different person was standing in front of him. A person that was much more unpredictable and dangerous. Meanwhile, Neff said, don't pretend to. Suddenly, she stumbled, then frowned. It seemed as though Sunny's question touched something in Changing Star's mind, causing a chain reaction. A few seconds passed, each turning her frown deeper. Slowly, the familiar poised calmness returned to her eyes. It didn't seem as though she had remembered everything, but, just as Neffys had promised, it seemed enough to make her listen to what Sunny had to say. He understood it from the fact that she had finally removed the tip of the sword from this throat. She even helped him stand up. Looking at Sunny with a strange expression, she then said, I really told you those words. Rubbing his slightly cut neck, he simply nodded. Bloodweave was already busy repairing the damage to his skin. Neffys looked down, then closed her eyes for a few moments. When she opened them again, they were full of resolve. What do I need to do? Sunny really wanted to ask her about the meaning of the three mysterious names, but decided against it. They had to hurry, ask Cassie to summon her staff, then get her into the boat. Dismissing her sword, Changing Star glanced at him for the last time and walked toward her friend. Somehow, Neffys had managed to talk Cassie into following her and boarding the ghastly vessel. She probably had to lie about a lot of things, but Sunny didn't want to ask, afraid that his flaw would ruin everything. Once the girls were inside the boat, he wrapped his tired body into the shadow and put his hands on the metal hull. Every part of his body seemed to hurt in its own unique way. His mind was utterly exhausted. "Come on, Sunny. One last push." With a crooked smile, he strained his muscles and pushed the boat toward black water. As the last light of dusk disappeared, submerging the world into absolute darkness, the boat built from the bones of a demon slipped from the ashen sand into the cold embrace of the dark sea. Following Sunny's instructions, Cassie aimed her staff and activated its enchantment, causing a strong gale to fill their modest sail. At first, the boat moved slowly, the mast creaking under pressure. But Changing Star's craftsmanship was meticulous and reliable. The demon's spine held, and little by little, the small vessel began to gain speed. Sunny sat at the stern, controlling the steering oar. In front of them, an endless expanse of black water stretched to the horizon, hiding indescribable horrors in its depths. Behind them, the terrifying soul-devouring tree was slowly growing smaller. Sunny stared at it, feeling a deep sense of regret grip his heart. He wished that he was powerful enough to destroy it. Leaving just like that, without exacting revenge on the ancient monster, filled him with anger. Well, at least he left it a present. Back at the Ashen Barrow, a candle was burning in a small alcove of stones that protected its flame from wind. Near the candle, a tall pile of dry, fallen leaves was towering over the alcove. It had taken Sunny a long time to gather that pile. He had scoured most of the island, hoping to make it as tall as possible. He had also mixed dry seaweed and the remaining fat of the carapace demon into the leaves. Some time later, the small candle was nearing the end of its life. Most of the wax had already melted, turning it even smaller. Just as the flame was about to go out, it ignited the leaves. After a few seconds, a massive, searing bonfire ignited in the middle of the island, illuminating the scarlet leaves of the evil tree. Almost instantly, the black waters surrounding the island surged with movement. Sunny was already too far away to see any of it. He didn't know if the creatures of the dark sea would be able to obliterate the soul devourer. He strongly doubted that the ancient fiend was that easy to destroy. However, with the carapace demon dead and the 3 humans meant to replace him gone, there was no one on the island to protect the gluttonous tree. Perhaps it would be seriously harmed, at least. For now, it was the best he could do. Looking back in the direction of the Ashen Barrow, Sunny gritted his teeth and thought. One day, I will become powerful enough to destroy that tree, these monsters, and anyone else who would dare to stand in my way. One day, I will become powerful enough to never be afraid again, of anyone or anything. Instead, all of them will fear me. He didn't notice that, just as he was thinking these words, Cassie suddenly raised her head and turned in his direction. On her face, a dark expression appeared, soon erased by uncertainty and doubt. In the absolute darkness, a small vessel was gliding on the black surface of a restless sea. Its mast, made of a demon's spine, was straining under the assault of the winds. In the eerie silence of this vast and lightless void, the swift boat cut through the waves like a blade. No sounds could be heard except for the creaking of bones and the crashing of water against its polished metal hull. Sunny sat at the oar, steering the carapace vessel. He was guiding them west. With no moon or stars to show them the path, it was hard to keep the boat on course. But there was a mark left in his mind by the cold and menacing shadow of the Crimson Spire. Using it as a compass, he was able to navigate the treacherous waters without losing his way. Black skies above, dark sea beneath. With nothing but a thin layer of steel separating them from the tenebrous abyss, they sailed through the night. Below them, countless horrors were hiding in the cursed depths. Several times, Sunny felt gargantuan shadows moving close to the small boat, attracted by the sound of its passing. Powerless to do anything, he had no choice but to tremble in silence, praying that the terrible creatures would turn away. So far, luck was on their side. Perhaps they were too small and feeble to satiate the hunger of these ancient leviathans. A few hours after the start of the voyage, Sunny felt that the constant pull on his mind had begun to wane. His thoughts were slowly becoming clearer, the haze of forgetfulness weakening with each minute. Soon, a ghostly sound of shattering glass resounded in his head. Instantly, the last remnants of the fog that was clouding his consciousness disappeared. He was free from the enthrallment of the soul devourer. Relieved, Sunny couldn't help but smile. However, his smile was weak and hesitant. With the effects of the mind hex gone, his usual sharpness had returned. It felt as though an invisible weight had been lifted, allowing his thoughts to finally flow unobstructed once again. Everything became clearer, as though the whole world suddenly came into focus. It was a wonderful feeling, but with it came a better understanding of how terrifying and precarious their current situation was. They were quite literally balancing on the edge of a hungry abyss, their lives relying on nothing but capricious fortune. The decision to venture into the dark expanse of the cursed sea on a makeshift boat was pure insanity. But then again, there was nothing sane about the forgotten shore to begin with. In this desolate hell, the craziest choice was sometimes the best one you had. Gritting his teeth, Sunny held the oar and stared into the darkness. A few minutes later, Cassie suddenly shifted, making the boat gently sway. She handed the magical staff to Neffys and cautiously moved closer to Sunny, feeling her way through the darkness with her hands. Before Sunny could guess what was it that she wanted from him, he was suddenly caught in a tight embrace. The blind girl hid her face in his chest, hot tears streaming down her face. Sunny froze, stunned and having no idea what to do. He could feel Cassie's body pressed against him and shaking from crying, her hands tightly wrapped around his neck. While he was trying to comprehend the situation, she quietly whispered, "Thank you, thank you." Feeling extremely awkward, Sunny pretended to clear his throat. No need to thank me. If it wasn't for your warning, we would still be stuck on that island. So, we're even." Then, he raised his hand and awkwardly patted her on the back. Both of them were careful to keep their voices as quiet as possible, afraid that they will attract something from the black depths. Cassie silently cried for several minutes, then finally let go of him. Wiping her face, she pulled her body away and whispered, "I'm sorry." Her voice sounded a bit strange. Confused, Sunny raised his eyebrows. What is she apologizing for? I'm sorry too. For, grabbing you back then." She smiled and, wiping the last tear from her face, turned away to move back to the middle of the boat. Sunny was left alone once again. With nothing to do except for holding the steering oar, he let his thoughts wander. With his mind clear again, many things were worth revisiting. He had to distract himself from the eerie pressure of the endless dark emptiness somehow, anyway. Despite the fact that their experience with the Soul Devourer was nothing short of harrowing, Sunny had somehow managed to end up considerably better off on the other end of it. His haul this time was truly unbelievable. He had received an amazing new weapon, no less than 100 shadow fragments, and 2 new attributes. Spark of Divinity was a real improvement over its previous version. The ability to perceive the inner structure of memories alone opened a whole new horizon of possibilities. However, he was more interested in the mysterious blood weave. Somehow, Sunny felt that he had severely underestimated the uniqueness and importance of that attribute. Its origins, too, were covered in a veil of secrets. Who was that weaver whose ichor he had consumed? Who were the unknown that even the spell was reluctant to mention? What was their connection to the gods? Why were the type and rank of the initial memory he had received from the vile thieving bird spawn left empty? How was it even possible for a memory to give and awaken new attributes? That last question guided him to think of something else. Glancing up, he stared at Neffys and tried to recollect their conversation. Looking back, she had revealed a lot of things that he had failed to notice in the moment. First of all, Sunny now knew that Cassie's enchanted armor, which had been given to her by Changing Star, was an awakened memory of the 6th tier. That meant that it came from an awakened terror, a nightmare creature 1 class above Mountain King that he himself had killed in his first nightmare. The secret of how Changing Star had managed to earn her true name was now 1 step closer to being revealed. Apparently, as far as accomplishing the impossible went, Neffys had outdone even Sunny. An aspirant triumphing over an awakened tyrant was already unbelievable enough. But killing an awakened terror gave the word, unbelievable, a whole new meaning. No wonder her aspect ability is so versatile. Now, he was almost sure that Changing Star's aspect was of the divine rank, just like his. That would explain why she was able to both heal and destroy with her strange and formidable powers, a combination as rare as his own shadow control. What's the probability of two sleepers with divine aspects ending up so close to each other in the dream realm? Close to zero. It seemed like the unpredictable, fated attribute had twisted the strings of fate once again. Sunny felt shivers running down his spine. His innate attribute was capable of bringing both terrible curses and incredible blessings. At first glance, their meeting with Nephi's seemed like the latter. But, if it was truly the result of fated manipulating destiny, it could turn out to be the worst of calamities in the end. After all, one of the possible meanings of her true name was Star of Ruin. The fear he had felt in that short moment before crossing swords with Nephi's was still fresh in Sunny's mind. And there were other things that she had revealed, too. She apparently knew something about the drop of ichor, being that she had called it a lineage memory, without batting an eye. That suggested that Nephi's knew much more about the spell than Sunny and the rest of the public did. It seemed as though there were secrets in the upper echelons of Awakened that they didn't want anyone else to know. The three mysterious names she had told him might have been another of these secrets. And that last word she used, asking which domain he belonged to. What were these domains? So many questions. Sunny spent many hours pondering them, as well as going over all the information about the forgotten shore he had gathered. The carapace boat flew over the dark water, drawing closer and closer to the western horizon. Soon, he felt that the night was already drawing its last breaths. The light of hope ignited in Sunny's heart. However, this was when their luck had finally run out. The disaster came unexpected, violently throwing them into a void of confusion. This time, Sunny had not felt anything approaching the boat. The danger simply appeared out of nowhere, leaving him no time to react. 1 second, the black waters were calm and clear. The next, they were boiling with movement, grotesque tentacles rising from them and wrapping themselves around the hull of the boat. Sunny tried to jump to his feet, but at that moment, the whole vessel was violently jerked to the side. Falling, he heard the moans of metal being bent and torn apart. Then, salty water filled his mouth. Rising, he caught a glimpse of Nephi standing at the bow of the boat, her silver sword lashing out at the approaching tentacle. However, blinded by darkness, she failed to notice a different threat. Another tentacle twisted and coiled around her body. Then, without even a scream, she was gone, dragged into the dark depths, with no hope to return. All that remained was a long blade stuck helplessly in the bulbous flesh of the massive tentacle. Sunny's eyes widened in disbelief. No, 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 this can't be happening. The hull of the carapace vessel was then crushed and torn into pieces, throwing him into the cold, black water. For a moment, Sunny was stunned by the coldness. Then, wrapping the shadow around his body, he swam up, trying to reach the surface. Soon, he succeeded and spun, trying to see something, anything, to give him hope. But there was nothing around, only undulating waves and twisting tentacles. Except for, far in the distance, Sunny noticed an unclear shape rising above the water. He strained his eyes, trying to discern its nature. Then, his heart skipped a beat. A few hundred meters away, a giant stone hand towered above the surface of the sea, its palm opened as though trying to embrace the sky. It was slender and delicate, carved by the unknown sculptor with almost inhuman skill. If Sunny didn't know better, he would have thought that the hand belonged to a living, breathing being. But all of this didn't matter right now. All that mattered was that he had a chance to survive. Straining every muscle in his body, Sunny dodged a twisting tentacle and swam toward the hand, moving as fast as he could. But then, he suddenly stopped. And looked back. Misshapen pieces of metal and bone, all that remained of their boat, were floating on the surface of the dark sea. He had seen Neph being pulled under the water by the tentacles of the unknown creature, but Cassie, clad in her enchanted attention-repelling tunic, had a chance to escape. He couldn't just leave without at least trying to find her. Or can I? A dark thought appeared in Sunny's mind. After all, his own survival was the only thing that really mattered. Everything else was just a distraction. Why don't you think about yourself for a second? Are you really going to risk your precious life on the off chance that this helpless girl is still alive? He hesitated. Admit it, she is nothing but a burden. You always knew that one day she was going to drag you down. Yes, he did, but what? You're going to die, fool. Turn around and flee, now. Why was he even hesitating? This was his chance to escape. His only chance, perhaps. He had to survive. Feeling an almost unbearable feeling of regret filling his chest, Sunny slowly inhaled. Then, he gritted his teeth and dove down, heading back to the spot where their boat had been destroyed. What are you doing? Have you lost your mind? He couldn't see in the black water, but his shadow sense was still somewhat effective. He had a chance to feel Cassie's presence, at least if she wasn't already dead and dragged to the bottom of this cursed abyss. You fool, how is she worth it? Why are you doing this? Grimacing, he forced his annoying inner voice to shut up. In his mind, the answer was clear. Because I want to. Because he wanted to. For once, Sunny's heart wasn't full of fear and despair. Instead, it was filled with defiant indignation. He was tired of bending under the pressure of the world, furtively clutching to the tiniest glimmers of hope, always afraid, always willing to do anything, abandon anything, just to survive for another day. It wasn't enough anymore. He wanted to make the world bend to his wishes instead. He wanted to live like a human being instead of an animal. In these past months, Sunny had changed without even noticing. Somehow, he had grown unsatisfied with his previous way of life, one where his sole goal of survival at all cost overshadowed everything else. Whether he lives or dies had always been the only thing that mattered. But now, how he lived mattered more. What was the point of having no master if he lived like a slave? Gritting his teeth, Sunny dove into the dark abyss. The cold water embraced him like a burial shroud. He couldn't see in this cursed blackness, relying only on his shadow sense for guidance. Salt sipped into the bite marks on his hands and the cut on his neck, making them burn. Not paying the agony any attention, Sunny used his considerable strength to propel himself deeper and deeper into the darkness. He could feel the giant tentacles moving in the water around him, pulling the pieces of the carapace boat into the gargantuan maw that was hiding somewhere far below. Once or twice, he had to desperately twist his body to avoid being touched by one of them. But still, no sign of Cassie. His lungs were starting to burn. Sunny dove deeper. At this depth, the water pressure was starting to affect his movements, making each stroke feel heavier. Even with his body enhanced by the shadow, there was a limit to how much it could withstand. Sunny suspected that without the blood weave, he would have suffocated a long time ago. What's worse, he felt as though he was getting closer and closer to the actual body of the unknown horror that had destroyed their vessel. He still couldn't sense its massive shape, but judging by the girth of the tentacles that surrounded him, the monster couldn't have been far. And then, Sunny finally noticed something. A short distance away from him, a small shadow was struggling against a much larger and ferocious one. Cassie. Gathering all his strength, Sunny swam toward the blind girl with as much speed as he could muster. As he drew near, he could discern the details of what was happening. Cassie was being pulled down, a smaller tentacle coiled around her body. She was still struggling, trying to get free, but her movements were growing weaker with each second. She was suffocating. Filled with fury, Sunny propelled himself forward and grabbed onto the tentacle, feeling slippery flesh throbbing in his grip. If he had any choice, he would have avoided touching that thing at all costs. But fighting underwater was tricky. If he wanted to deliver any sort of a powerful blow, he had to find some form of support first. Summoning the midnight shard, Sunny strained every muscle in his body and slashed across the tentacle, right below the point where it was coiled around Cassie's lower torso. He knew that he wouldn't be able to do any serious harm with that strike, which was slowed down to a crawl by the burdensome resistance of the black water. However, his amazing sword was still sharp enough to cut into the fleshy tentacle, causing a cloud of dark blood to gush out of the wound. The tentacle furiously twitched and shot sideways, as though trying to shake the attacker off. Flying through the darkness, Sunny held on for dear life and moved his blade upward, slicing the spongy flesh apart. He never hoped to chop the tentacle off with one strike. No amount of strength would have allowed that to happen. Luckily, swords were able to pierce, slash, and cut. Pushing the blade, Sunny cut deep into the tentacle. When the Suba was about to touch the wound, he changed his grip and pulled the Tachi down. Monster's flesh spread apart under the razor-sharp blade, barely offering any resistance. A torrent of blood surged out, and with the last push, the tentacle was completely severed. Sunny was finally able to turn his attention to Cassie to see how she was doing. What he sensed made him scowl. The blind girl was barely conscious. He needed to get her to the surface as fast as possible. Pushing away the twitching remains of the tentacle, Sunny dismissed his sword and grabbed Cassie across the torso, feeling how cold her skin was through the thin fabric of her tunic. Weakly, she tried to resist, not realizing that it was him and not the monster. Pressing the blind girl to his chest, Sunny turned his head up and felt a wave of desperation crashing against the walls of his mind. His lungs were in agony, no air whatsoever left in them. His body was slowly losing its strength, full of terrible pain and thirsting for a breath of fresh air with maddening intensity. Even if he could see anything, at this point, his vision would have begun to darken. And they were so far away from the surface. What's worse, the horror of the depths was now alerted to his location. Countless tentacles were already moving, surrounding them in an impenetrable barrier of flesh. A second or two later, they would be crushed to death in the devastating embrace of the sea monster. Sunny didn't know how to save them, but he wasn't going to give up, no matter what. Making an arduous stroke with his one free hand, he held tightly onto Cassie and swam up. The tentacles were approaching, blocking all paths of escape. Sunny gritted his teeth, and, in the next moment, the water around them suddenly turned pure white. An incandescent radiance filled a vast expanse of the cursed sea, obliterating any sign of darkness. The explosion of light was so intense that it pierced through Sunny's eyelids and hurt his eyes. It was as though a miniature sun had ignited somewhere far below them, turning the endless black abyss into a pristine white void. Tidal currents of radiant water surged tumultuously, throwing the world into disarray. The gargantuan tentacles convulsed and writhed madly, as though in the throes of unbearable pain. The unbreakable barrier of flesh fell apart. Sunny wasn't about to let this chance go. Straining his suffocating body, he swam to the surface, dodging the writhing tentacles. With the furious white sun burning in the depths below, he could see their shapes clearly. Moving faster and faster, he propelled himself up with everything he had left. Sunny knew that surfacing that fast was dangerous, but there was no other choice. Both Cassie and himself did not have a lot of life left in them. They needed air. Although it seemed like an eternity, the white radiance began to dim just a few moments later. But it didn't matter. Sunny was already past the barrier of tentacles, swimming up with desperate speed. He was afraid that they wouldn't make it. His consciousness was already beginning to wane, slowly slipping into the cold clutches of empty nothingness. Even knowing that there was nothing but water around, he was still overwhelmed by the suicidal desire to open his mouth and inhale as deeply as he could. His muscles were spasming, devoid of oxygen for too long. And then, finally, Sunny's head broke the surface. Blinded by pain, he drew in a gasping breath and coughed uncontrollably. Held tightly in his arms, Cassie was doing the same. Her chest was ruggedly moving up and down, sucking in the sweet ambrosia of air. Sunny never knew how precious it was before, not even while being slowly poisoned by the harmful, polluted air of the outskirts. They made it. Trying to compose himself, Sunny looked around. The last remnants of the white radiance were long gone, erased as if they had never existed. The world was once again consumed by absolute darkness. However, far away in the east, the first light of dawn was about to shine from beyond the horizon. Catching the glimpse of the giant stone hand, Sunny gripped Cassie's shoulders and swam in that direction. Sunny felt that he was at the end of his rope. He had put himself through too much abuse during these last few days. Now, it was hard to even remember when was the last time he had slept. A day before climbing the soul-devouring tree in search of a special fruit, perhaps. Since then, he had lived through the harrowing torture of the blood-weave transformation, spent countless hours on the verge of mental collapse to resist the effects of the enthrallment, mangled his hands to stay lucid, guided the boat through the terrors of the dark sea in absolute darkness, saw it being destroyed by the horrid dweller of the deep, and gave battle to that monster in the cold black depths, almost drowning as the result. His body and mind were on the brink of shutting off. Despite that, Sunny stubbornly continued to swim, bringing himself and Cassie closer and closer to the giant stone hand that was rising from the water, as though trying to embrace the skies. The dark sea was surging around him, still reeling from the effects of the light explosion that had rocked it sometime earlier. Tall waves were threatening to drown the two sleepers, throwing them around like toys. Struggling against them was a hard task. And still, he persisted. The dawn was drawing close, but for now, there was still nothing but cold, darkness and danger all around them. Any second, something could rise from the depths of the abyss and put an end to their desperate attempt to save themselves. At least the tentacles were gone, perhaps scared away by the pain of being exposed to the searing light. By some miracle, Sunny eventually managed to reach the stone hand. Hoisting Cassie up, he helped her climb on the dark rocks and followed closely behind. Soon, they reached the open palm of the hand and crawled to its center, then fell down, utterly spent and exhausted. For a long time, neither of them was able to talk. All Sunny could do was lay motionless, draw in raspy breaths, and try to stay awake. His mind was empty of thoughts. That was fine, because he didn't want to think. If he did, he would be forced to remember what had happened to. Shut up. What was the point of remembering? He couldn't change anything. The sound of the black water crashing against the base of the giant hand reminded him that the night was still not over. Opening his eyes, Sunny tried to understand their current circumstances. Their shelter was slightly raised above the waves, the base of the giant thumb almost touching the surface of the dark sea. The palm was not very spacious, roughly half the size of the circular platform that had saved his life on his first day on the forgotten shore. It was angled upward, creating a slight slope. The fingers were higher above waves and wide enough to accommodate a person, but they were bent upward toward the sky, making them less suitable to serve as a refuge. We need to get further away from the water. With that thought, Sunny tiredly stood up and bent down to touch Cassie's shoulder. Cassie, stand up. We have to move higher. His voice sounded hollow and brittle. The blind girl flinched and raised her head, her skin deathly pale. Sunny, he nodded. Yeah, it's me. She was still in shock. Sunny could see that Cassie's mind was not all there yet, so he gently pulled her to her feet. Come on, let's go. It's just a few meters. She lingered. What happened? I heard a sound, and then something was pulling me down. He gritted his teeth and tried to keep his tone even. We were attacked by a sea monster. The boat was destroyed. I dove down and managed to find you, then swam to this pile of stones. It's not very high above the water, so. Cassie wavered. Where's? Sunny hurried to interrupt her, unwilling to answer the next question. Come, follow me. We can rest when we're higher. Gently guiding the blind girl, Sunny climbed to the base of the giant hand's index finger, which was the highest point they could reach without climbing the fingers themselves. Sitting down on the cold stone, he rested his back against the giant phalanx and stared at the restless surface of the dark sea. His eyes were cold and empty. Cassie was silent by his side. Her pale face was contorted, as though she simultaneously wanted to ask the question and dreaded the answer. Finally, gathering her courage, the blind girl whispered, her trembling voice barely audible. Sunny, where is Neff? He stayed silent, not willing to speak the words out loud. Stupidly, he felt that if he spoke them, they would become the truth. But if he didn't, there was still a possibility that they were a lie. I'm not answering. A few moments later, the familiar pressure appeared in his mind. The pressure grew and grew, making his head spin. I'm not. Then, the piercing pain came. Sunny stubbornly endured it. He lasted for much longer than he had ever done before, keeping his mouth shut until hot tears rolled from his eyes, his whole body shaking from the terrible suffering. But eventually, he was still forced to say those bitter words. She's G. Before he could finish, a subtle sound attracted his attention. It came from below, from the edges of the restless dark waves. Sunny's heart skipped a beat. Out there at the base of the giant thumb, where the cursed sea was almost touching its stone surface, a pale white hand appeared from the black water and grabbed onto the rocks. Then, a tall figure slowly pulled itself onto the opened palm of the stone giantess. His eyes widened. Feeling that something was wrong, Cassie turned her head and asked. Sunny, what is it? He trembled and whispered, gripped with sorrow. It's Neffy's. An uncertain smile appeared on the blind girl's face. Neff, she is all right. Sunny found himself unable to answer. No, Neffy's was not all right. In fact, he didn't know how she was even alive. The Starlight Legion armor was shattered and torn, revealing the mutilated flesh beneath. There was a horrifying gaping wound on Changing Star's torso, looking as though almost half of her right side was missing. Sunny could see the sharp shards of broken ribs, the rivers of blood streaming down her legs, and the mangled mess of viscera spilling over the edges of the wound. He wanted to close his eyes. Another large chunk of flesh was missing from her thigh, exposing the shredded remnants of muscle in the white surface of the femur, cracked and barely holding together. Her right arm was severely damaged, too. In fact, it was almost torn off, hanging only by a narrow strip of skin and a few tendons, like that of a mistreated, broken marionette. Even her face was not spared. One of Neff's eyes was gone, its socket crushed and shattered, the skin of her cheek was shaved off as though by sandpaper, leaving behind a mangled mess of bleeding flesh and broken teeth. The sight of her was harrowing and heartbreaking. It was apparent that Changing Star was about to die. Sunny, why are you not answering? He glanced at Cassie and bit his lip, trying once again to suppress the answer that was fighting its way out. Something sharp and hot was stabbing at his heart, making his vision blurry. Meanwhile, Neffy staggered and blindly stepped forward. Her legs buckled, and she heavily fell to her knees, splattering blood all over the cold surface of the stone. A terrible moan escaped from her lips as her cracked femur finally shattered, bone piercing through muscle and skin. Sunny felt as though he was thrown into his worst nightmare. He wanted to scream, but his voice was gone. A deep, almost physical pain was tearing him from inside. He didn't want to be here. He didn't want to see this. And yet, he couldn't look away. That's why he noticed instantly when two white flames ignited in Neff's eyes. The radiance grew brighter and brighter, spilling from her eyes, her mouth, the gaping wounds in her body. It was as though there was a flaming star burning in the place where her heart should have been, as though she was nothing but white flame hidden behind a thin layer of human skin. The incandescent radiance filled Changing Star's blood, turning it into streams of liquid white fire. As Sunny watched, frozen in place with his eyes opened wide, that fire began to melt and reshape her flesh. Slowly, her muscles repaired herself, her organs returned to their places, her bones reassembled themselves from the shards. Where there was nothing to replace a missing part, the fire took its shape and solidified. With a terrible scream, Neffy's grasped her almost severed arm and tore it away, then pressed it to the stump that was bleeding with white flame. Soon, the mangled halves melted together, becoming whole again. Shocked, he saw every terrible wound on her body heal, washed in the purifying fire. Soon, there was nothing but pristine white skin showing through the wide gaps in the shattered armor. Neffy's raised her head, looking at them but not seeing anything. There was no recognition in her gaze, all understanding destroyed by the cruel crucible of the sacred fire. Then the last daughter of the immortal Flame clan closed her eyes and fell to the ground, losing consciousness. Finally, the first rays of sunshine appeared from beyond the eastern horizon. The dawn was coming. In the end, Neffy's had remained unconscious for an entire 2 days. On the third day, she finally opened her eyes and slowly rose, looking around with subtle confusion. Her face, as usual, was calm and indifferent. However, she did flinch a little when her gaze fell on Sunny, who was sitting at the top of the giant hand's index finger and grinning from ear to ear at her. Frowning, Changing Star looked herself over, noticing the embarrassing gaps in her armor, and said, "Why are you smiling?" Sunny gave her a mischievous wink and shrugged. "Look behind you." Lingering for a few seconds, Neff sighed and turned around, wondering what is it that he wanted her to see. Behind her, a dark expanse of land was rising above the slope of the colossal crater. And on it, a tall city wall built of gray polished stone was towering over the giant chasm of the abyss. It looked ancient but still impenetrable, able to withstand the crushing pressure of the dark sea for 1,000 more years. They've made it. That had found the human castle. End of Volume 1, Child of Shadows. Wake up, Sunless. Your nightmare is, shut the hell up. Trying to remain in the blissful embrace of sleep, Sunny hissed through his teeth and stubbornly closed his eyes tighter. He was warm and comfortable under the blanket, on his own bed, where all the problems of the world seemed less serious and dire. For a moment, there was silence. That's better. Wake up, Sunless. Goddammit. Thrusting one arm from under the blanket, Sunny summoned one of his memories. Immediately, a triangular leaf-shaped throwing dagger appeared in his hand, only to be thrown blindly at the source of the irritating voice. Missing its mark, the kunai clinked against the stone wall and fell to the floor. However, the voice did fall silent. Sunny sighed. It was already too late. He was awake. Far in the distance, the waves were starting to crash against the city wall. The night was coming, so it was time to get up. Opening his eyes, Sunny sat up and looked around. His room was beautiful and spacious. The stone walls were engraved with intricate patterns, creating an atmosphere of sanctity and elegance. The furniture was made out of pale polished wood, with several mismatched pieces that Sunny had scavenged from different places himself. The room had no windows, however, there were light wells cunningly hidden here and there. Sadly, the ingenious system of mirrors that was supposed to bathe the hidden chamber in sunlight was long destroyed, leaving only darkness inside. Sunny didn't mind. In fact, this was one of the features of his secret lair that he enjoyed the most. Darkness was his best friend. Yawning, he stood up and rubbed his face to chase away the last remnants of sleep. His long, dirty hair was getting in the way, so he moved it back. Let's make some breakfast. But first things first. Sunny moved his hand, pulling on the invisible string that connected his wrist to the ring-shaped pommel of the kunai. The throwing dagger jumped into the air and landed on his palm. This was a trick that had taken Sunny quite some time to master. In the beginning, he almost lost a couple of fingers while trying to learn how to control the flying blade. Walking over to a wall empty of engravings, he used the kunai to scratch a small line into the stone. All around it, there were dozens and dozens of similar lines, grouped neatly into sets of 5. It had already been 4 months since Sunny came to this loathsome, god-forsaken city. Many things had happened during that time. Cassie's vision turned out to be true. Far in the west, they indeed found a vast, ruined city surrounded by tall walls, with monsters wandering its narrow streets. And in the center of the city, there was a hill with a magnificent castle standing on its top. Miraculously, the castle was full of people. However, they weren't awakened, as the 3 of them had hoped. Instead, they were, each and every one of them, mere sleepers. Because there were no gateway in the castle, hundreds of humans, those who had managed to survive the lethal hellscape of the Forgotten Shore due to their strength or luck, were stuck there with no hope of ever returning to the real world. It was nothing but a graveyard of hope. Remembering his first days in the castle, Sunny couldn't help but laugh out loud. Oh, what a fool he had been. So full of hope and newfound faith in humanity, where's that faith now, huh? Laughing hysterically, he bent over and slapped his knees. Oh, that's funny. Good one, Sunny. What do you think about that, buddy? The shadow didn't respond, staring at him with reproach. Its silence only made Sunny laugh louder. He just couldn't stop. To be honest, he had gone a little bit insane some time ago. Probably around his 3rd week of living alone in the city. He was more or less alright after leaving the castle due to that unfortunate falling out with, well, it didn't matter. The point was that on his 3rd week, that damn bastard of a knight had almost disemboweled him, leaving Sunny no choice but to crawl away while using his own 2 hands to stop his intestines from falling out. After finding his way to a secluded ditch and lying there for a few days, too weak to move and simply waiting to die, with not a soul around to help him, Sunny wasn't quite the same. Good times. Anyway, he survived. Dismissing the kunai, Sunny walked over to a table that he had scavenged from the ruins of a library and glanced at the gray rock that was lying in its center. No matter how you looked at it, it was just an ordinary rock. However, as soon as Sunny's gaze fell on it, the rock spoke. Wake up, Sunless. Your nightmare is over. That rock was, in fact, one of his most valuable memories. In all ways except for one, it was indeed just a rock, which was already useful enough. There were a lot of things that someone as devious as Sunny could accomplish with the help of a rock. However, this particular rock was also capable of parroting different sounds, which made it simply priceless. Right now, it was parroting Sunny's own voice. Wake up, you vile thing. Struggling with the irrational desire to turn the parrot rock into dust, Sunny dismissed it and removed a piece of cloth from the table. Beneath it, a few strips of monster meat lay on a silver platter. He had hunted this monster himself, which was not an easy task in these parts. In fact, as far as Sunny knew, he was one of the very few people capable of hunting in the city alone. The reason for this was that most of the nightmare creatures populating it were of the fallen rank, with only a handful of weaker ones hiding here and there. No one was crazy enough to hunt the fallen monsters. Instead, large hunting parties used experienced guides to avoid these powerful creatures while searching for easier prey. But to Sunny, singling out stray awakened monsters were comparatively easy. He hunted at night, using deep shadows to make himself nothing short of invisible. If he didn't want to fight a fallen abomination, he didn't have to. Most of the time, in any case, he never went hungry. Sunny grinned and said in a deeply satisfied tone, "Ah, life is good." Life, indeed, was good. In fact, Sunny would even go so far as to say that, currently, it was wonderful. One would expect that being stuck in a cursed city located in the middle of an actual hell, surrounded by nothing but ruins and horrifying monsters, was not really the best way to live your life. But to him, this was somewhat of a paradise. To his surprise, Sunny had found out that this type of existence suited him pretty well. He had no obligations, no need to worry about the future and, most importantly, was not required to interact with other humans. Humans always made things hard and complicated. He was sick of them. Being on your own was much better. He didn't have to pretend to be someone else, force himself to behave differently from how he wanted to, and strain his mind trying to understand people's convoluted feelings. For the first time in his life, Sunny could simply be himself. Turns out, his true self was very easy to please. He had no shortage of interesting things to do, explore, and kill. His life was very entertaining and comfortable, all things considered. It was at least way better than his pathetic existence in the outskirts, back in the real world. The key to this harmonious feeling was very simple. It was to have no hope. Sunny discovered that hope was the true enemy of peace. It was the most vile and poisonous thing in the universe. If there was even a glimmer of hope to return home, he would have been desperate, full of anxiety, and probably in the middle of some insane disaster right now. Like he had always been before. But without hope, things were simple and pleasant. He really couldn't wish for more. Keep telling yourself this crap. You might really believe it. Sunny grinned. What is there to believe? It's the truth. The shadow silently shook its head, long accustomed to his crazy tirades. Lately, Sunny had been talking with himself a lot, having long arguments that sometimes descended into screaming matches. It was a good way to pass the time. A bit later, he emerged from his secret chamber. Sunny's lair was situated in the upper part of a ruined cathedral, the entrance hidden behind a tall statue of some unknown goddess. There was a small balcony that allowed him to observe the grand hall of the temple over the goddess's shoulder, concealed from sight by the strands of her stone hair. The balcony was really high above the floor, making it impossible for any creature to climb on it by accident. Falling down would certainly kill a normal human. Sunny had discovered the hidden room while spying on the bastard that had gutted him. He had entered the cathedral through the hole in its roof and landed on one of the wide support beams, then walked across and accidentally noticed the small balcony. That's how he and the bastard had become neighbors. The bastard was, in fact, the guardian of this place. He patrolled the grand hall, killing anyone who dared to come inside. Sunny saw plenty of powerful nightmare creatures fall to his sword, cleaved apart without much effort. Of course, the bastard was a nightmare creature of considerable power himself. Sunny was pretty sure that he was at least a devil. Sharing the cathedral with a devil was very convenient. Sunny could sleep easy knowing that no monster would be able to reach the inner sanctum alive. Of course, he had to be careful to never be seen by his murderous roommate. On the upside, he could observe the devil as much as he wanted, waiting for a chance to exact his revenge. Sunny was hellbent on killing the damn knight, eventually. The bastard had to die, but before that, Sunny had to become stronger. Much, much stronger. Walking across the beams of the cathedral, he approached the hole in the roof and climbed through it. Outside, the night was already reigning over the world. It was time to hunt. A skeletal, hunched figure was slowly walking along the narrow street of the cursed city. The creature had long arms that ended with vicious claws and a deformed head with a wide mouth full of razor-sharp fangs. Even with its back bent, the monster was at least 2 meters tall. It was dressed in a torn shroud that was once white, but had long ago turned brown from the dried blood. This was Sunny's prey. The creature, which was called a blood fiend, was among the weakest dwellers of the cursed city. It was merely an awakened monster, barely intelligent and comparatively easy to kill. Of course, nothing was really easy to kill here. After all, each and every human on the Forgotten Shore was just a dormant beast. Despite the fact that they shared the same rank and class, blood fiends were less formidable than carapace centurions in terms of strength and speed. However, that was only until they smelled blood, which sent them into a murderous frenzy. In that state, these fiends were a true menace. Pathetic, Sunny thought, stalking the nightmare creature from the shadows. He had killed a few of these monsters in the past and had a great time each time, well, except for this one encounter where he had accidentally scratched himself on a sharp stone. That was not fun at all. Time to die, you ugly freak. The blood fiend was just about to turn the corner when a sudden sound attracted his attention. With unnatural speed, the monster turned around and fell on all fours, his sensitive ears picking up the slightest rustle. Then, he took a few careful steps forward and stopped at a certain spot. In front of the fiend, an ordinary-looking rock was lying on the ground. A second later, the rock suddenly spoke. "Behind you," it said politely. The creature froze for a moment, then turned around with lightning-fast speed. Something whistled in the air, and the upper part of the blood fiend's body separated from the lower. Still refusing to die, the monster reached out with its long arms. Too slow, Sunny slashed with the midnight shard, severing one of the arms at the elbow. Continuing the motion, he took a quick step forward and performed another strike, this time piercing the creature's skull. The tip of the tachi entered through one of its eyes and exited through the back of the head. All of it took less than a second. By the time both parts of the monster fell to the ground, Sunny had already retrieved his sword. Looking up with expectation, he smiled and waited. "Come on, say it." As if answering his call, the spell whispered. "You have slain an awakened monster, blood fiend. Your shadow grows stronger." Sunny grinned. "Ah, thank you kindly. You're so sweet." The runes shimmered as they appeared in the air in front of him. Looking down, he read, "Shadow fragments. 398 1/1000ths. Just 2 fragments away from 400. These days, he was progressing at a very respectable speed. In the beginning, back when he had not known the city and the creatures that populated it, Sunny was lucky to get a few fragments in a week. He had also been much more prone to ending up bloodied and one step away from death. But now, things were slowly changing. He couldn't even remember the last time he felt compelled to say goodbye to life. "Ah, you idiot, you just had to go and think that out loud, huh?" Just as he finished that thought, a distant sound of footsteps reached his ears. Sunny looked grimly at the corpse of the blood fiend, then in the direction of the approaching footsteps. Who was crazy enough to remain in this cursed city during the night? Only a complete lunatic would do something that stupid. All the sane people were long gone from the streets, not to mention that very few were willing to enter the ruins to begin with. A dark shadow flowed from the tip of the midnight shard's blade. Coalescing on the ground, it stared at him with sarcasm. Sunny stared back. "What?" The shadow shook its head and didn't answer, forcing him to turn away with a confused shrug. "Whatever. Ah, it seems we have guests. What to do, what to do? The place is a mess." Looking around, Sunny sighed, glanced at the corpse of the monster once again, and summoned the kunai. The smart thing to do was to run away. Who knew what exactly was producing those footsteps? Maybe it was a group of people, maybe it was a nightmare creature with a lot of feet. It was better not to find out. He wasn't done with the hunt yet. He still had to get his trophies. Go take a look. Sending the shadow away, Sunny kneeled and began to cut the tough flesh of the dead creature. Without the enhancing effect of the shadow, slicing the blood fiend apart was not as easy. However, he still managed to find the first soul shard rather quickly. One more to go. Meanwhile, the shadow had discovered the uninvited visitors. 6 humans were cautiously walking along the narrow path in the stone ruins, lighting their way with a ghostly blue lantern. They were all rugged men, wearing mismatched suits of armor and armed to the teeth. Their eyes were cold and hard. Sunny raised his eyebrows. My, oh my, they really are people. What is a bunch of Gunlog's thugs doing outside the castle walls in the middle of the night? Gunlog was the owner of the castle and the self-proclaimed king of this odious place. Every sleeper on the Forgotten Shore was forced to either serve him or pay him tribute. Even still, the latter usually didn't live long. Dismissing the Midnight Shard and the Parrot Rock, Sunny concentrated on searching for the second soul shard. He wanted to be gone from the street before these gentlemen arrived. But the circle of blue light was approaching too fast. Finally catching a glimpse of the glowing crystal, Sunny grabbed it and hurriedly hid it in his armor. Then he dropped the kunai on the ground and took several steps back. But it was too late. They had already seen him. Be careful, there's a monster. As Sunny was backing away, several weapons were aimed in his direction. Feeling that things were about to get out of control, he cleared his throat and said in a trembling voice, "Oh, please don't hurt me, I'm a human." Saying this, he mentally looked himself over. With his ghostly pale skin and dirty hair, his ragged armor covered in layers of dried and fresh blood, Sunny was indeed easy to mistake for a nightmare creature. He wasn't really paying much attention to personal hygiene and appearances these days. Hopefully, speaking in a human language would prove his identity. Raising his hands to show that he wasn't armed, Sunny took another step back. The 6 sleepers were really surprised to see another human this far away from the walls of the castle, especially at night. Using their momentary confusion, he cautiously moved even further away. "Don't move." Finally able to comprehend the situation, one of the castle inhabitants hissed a threatening command. Sunny obediently froze, careful not to make any sudden movements. The unexpected guests proceeded to come closer, glancing at the corpse of the blood fiend as they walked past it. One of them was taller and better equipped than the rest. Piercing Sunny with a menacing gaze, he approached him and stopped 1 or 2 steps away. The man was older than Sunny by a few years. He was tall and muscular, with a patchy beard covering the lower part of his face and a mean look in his watery blue eyes. From his demeanor and memories, it was easy to tell that the leader of the group had spent no less than 3 years on the Forgotten Shore. He had experience and time to grow stronger than most sleepers here. However, it was also apparent that he wasn't really high up in the ranks of Gunlog's army. Otherwise, his equipment would have been much more impressive. Still, the heavy battle axe that was resting on the man's shoulder looked really sharp. It would take him only a second to bring that thing down on Sunny's head. "Who are you? What the hell are you doing here?" Sunny blinked a couple of times, then gulped and answered carefully. I'm Sunless. I live here." The leader of the hunting party, if that what it was, narrowed his eyes. "What? Live here? Do you take me a fool, boy? No one can survive in the city." The other sleepers were of the same opinion, except for one, who looked at Sunny with doubt. Frowning, he took a step forward and said in an uncertain tone, "Wait, Chief, he might be telling truth. I heard that there's a crazy kid who lives in the ruins alone." The taller man scowled. "How is that possible?" His subordinate glanced at Sunny and shrugged. "From what I heard, his aspect allows the boy to hide in the shadows really well. I guess he crawls around like a rat and picks up the leftovers after the monsters are done eating. I don't really know, but someone was talking about him back in the castle. I thought they were just telling tales." Sunny frowned. Crazy, boy, rat, why did everyone feel compelled to call him names? Meanwhile, the helpful sleeper thought for a bit and added, "I think he came into town with that bitch, Changing Star." Sunny's frown turned into a scowl. Looking down, he whispered to his shadow, "These guys are really very rude, don't you think?" Of course, his whisper was easily heard by everyone around. The sleepers stared at him in confusion. Sunny tilted his head a little and opened his eyes wide, as if shocked by something. "What, you think I should kill them all? I mean, isn't it a little bit over the top? I should give them a chance to apologize, at least." The leader of the hunting party took a step forward and said in a low, growling voice, "What are you mumbling about, rat?" Sunny looked at him with scorn and dissatisfaction. "Hey, I was talking to my buddy. can you please not interrupt? A wide, dangerous smile appeared on the tall man's face. With a sigh, Sunny turned to him and said, "All right, if you insist. You guys have offended my dearest friend, Nephies of the Immortal Flame clan. She and I are very, very close. So I'll give you one chance to apologize for calling her a, well, you know. If you don't, say goodbye to your lives." The older man stared at him for several seconds, then suddenly raised his head and laughed. "Oh, that's a good one. Have you heard, guys? This tiny weasel will give us a chance. How generous. Should we be generous too, huh? What do you say? The boy is sick in the head, after all." The other 5 sleepers were not sharing his enthusiasm. One of them smiled darkly and said, "No, Chief, I think we should just kill him. Put the poor fool out of his misery, you know." The sleeper that had collaborated Sunny's story before, meanwhile, was frowning again. "Wait, guys, he's one of Changing Star's people, remember? The original group, I mean. They had survived 2 entire months in the labyrinth on their own. We shouldn't underestimate TH. However, the leader interrupted him with a contemptuous scoff. "I heard that Saint Nephi's carried 2 useless sacks of shit on her back all the way to the castle. The bitch is fond of taking care of weaklings, right? That delicious little friend of hers is blind, for God's sake. I'm sure that this one is no better." Then, he turned to Sunny and grinned. "I tell you what, rat. Give us all your memories, and we'll be generous enough to let you live." Quote, "If an awakened died, their memories disappeared with them. The only way to get the memories was to make the owner transfer them of their own free will. However, whether or not that will was affected by coercion or torture didn't really matter. At least not to people like these." Sunny blinked. "So you're not going to apologize?" The tall man grinned. "I think not." Sunny sighed. "Oh well, so you want my memories, I have a few. Let me think. How about this one?" Lowering one hand, he summoned the parrot rock. It immediately appeared on his palm, looking as boring and ordinary as always. The leader of the hunting party frowned, not taking his eyes away from Sunny's face. Despite his crude exterior, he was paranoid and careful. Years of experience had taught him to never lower his guard. A moment later, the rock spoke. "Behind you." That was the most basic of tricks. The tall man grinned, still looking Sunny in the eyes. "Do you really think that I would fall for?" However, before he was done talking, the blade of the kunai hit him from behind, penetrating the back of the man's skull and killing him on the spot. Sunny had dropped the throwing dagger near the monster's body in advance and then took all those steps back to make this exact situation possible. As soon as the parrot rock spoke, he pulled on the invisible string, sending the kunai flying back in his direction. The tall bastard didn't just happen to be in its path, either. "You have slain." The leader of the hunting party really should have listened to that rock. Shadow grows stronger. Before the sleepers even had time to react, Sunny was already moving. The shadow had been wrapped around his body a long time ago, making him that much faster. Summoning the midnight shard, he fluidly slashed at the nearest enemy, severing the man's arm at the elbow. The blade struck right between the vambrace and the counter of his enchanted plate armor. To Sunny, these people were slow and clumsy, their power level and technique severely lacking. He had already been more experienced than them after the harrowing journey through the Crimson Labyrinth, learning how to wield the sword in combat from Changing Star herself. The 3 months he had spent hunting and surviving alone in the cursed city only made the gap that much wider. Despite looking like easy prey, Sunny was anything but. However, he wasn't foolish enough to challenge all 5 of them. People might have been weaker than nightmare creatures, but what made them really dangerous was their unpredictability. Each aspect was unique, arming humans with a formidable arsenal of inexplicable abilities. Facing something you couldn't understand was the surest way to end up dead. With his advantage of surprise gone, Sunny decided that it was time to retreat. Turning around, he jumped out of the circle of light and ran. It was really hard to pursue someone who could see in the dark on these narrow streets, so there was a real chance of escaping unscathed. However, the kunai was still attached to Sunny's wrist. Sliding out of the dead leader's skull, it fell to the ground and clinked loudly against the stones, then jumped a few meters away and hit the pavement again, creating more noise. "Get the bastard. He killed the chief." Following the sound of metal striking against stone, the sleepers lunged forward, following in Sunny's footsteps. What a persistent bunch. Even the guy who had lost his arm was on his heels, either having a way to stop the bleeding or simply unwilling to let the attacker escape even if it cost him his own life. This part of the city was Sunny's hunting ground. He knew every nook and cranny of these streets like his own 5 fingers. Honestly, he was unsure what these guys were even thinking. If it wasn't for him carefully choosing the path, they would have ended up disturbing some terrifying fallen creature and becoming its dinner a long time ago. Something wasn't quite right here. Gunlog's people might have been thugs, but they were experienced and accomplished hunters. They feared the city and knew how to behave while outside the castle walls. Otherwise, all of them would have been dead a long time ago. Come to think of that, it was extremely rare to see them going anywhere near the city at night. Were these fools even real hunters? If not, what were they up to? Sunny briefly considered leaving one of them alive to interrogate later, but then decided against it. To be honest, he wasn't really curious. Human business had long ago lost its allure in his eyes. He had much more interesting things to do. Finally reaching his goal, Sunny lingered on the steps, pretending to be in a panic. The 5 sleepers were once again able to lay eyes on their victim. The scrawny kid was hesitating in front of the entrance to a large ruined building, fear clearly written on his dirty, pale face. It seemed as though he didn't know where to go, afraid to run into a dead end. Noticing them, he flinched and dove into the building with desperation in his eyes. "You have nowhere to run now, rat," hissed the man who had lost his hand to Sunny's blade. Full of killing intent, the sleepers followed the crazy young man into the building. However, once they got inside, they saw no sign of the scared kid. The only thing they saw was a simple rock lying on the floor. As the one-armed man belatedly realized that something was wrong, the rock said in an ominous tone, "Say goodbye to your lives." A second later, a massive silhouette stepped out of the darkness. The man's eyes widened as the figure of a regal knight clad in a menacing black armor reflected in them. The creature was more than 2 meters tall, his Gothic armor forged from a lusterless, anthracite steel. Every part of the armor was decorated with intricate engravings that told a tale so horrifying that anyone would go insane from looking at them for too long. The helmet of the Black Knight was crowned with curved horns that might have been wings once. In the narrow fissure of his visor, 2 ghastly red flames were burning with indescribable menace. Before the sleeper had time to react, a heavy black blade fell from above, effortlessly severing his body from head to groin, cutting through flesh, bone and armor with similar ease. A torrent of blood surged to the floor. Climbing onto one of the supporting beams of the ruined cathedral, Sunny sat down and looked at the slaughter that was happening below. "Huh, the bastard is in a really bad mood today. Well, have fun." Sometime later, as the echoes of screams began to fade away, he sighed and counted the corpses lying on the distant floor. It was hard to count, because most of them were in pieces. Making sure that not one of the pursuers got away alive, Sunny frowned and shook his head. 6 people, their disappearance won't go unnoticed. Especially if they were really up to no good. Huh, why do I feel like I had just gotten myself in trouble? The Black Knight remained motionless for several minutes, silently observing the corpses of his enemies. Drops of blood fell from the blade of his fearsome greatsword, gathering into a puddle beneath his feet. The thoughts of the cruel creature were a mystery. To be honest, Sunny wasn't even sure that this unstoppable mountain of murderous black steel was sentient. In that regard, the monstrous inhabitants of the cursed city were a bit strange. Usually, nightmare creatures of higher classes possessed a perverse form of intelligence, which was often comparable to that of humans, and sometimes even surpassed it. However, that rule did not apply to every monster in this eerie place. From Sunny's observations, the dwellers of the ruined city could be roughly divided into 2 groups. The first group consisted of various creatures that came here from outside the wall, be it from the labyrinth or from the depths of the dark sea. These abominable things more or less followed the unnatural laws of the spell that every awakened was familiar with. The second group was different. These creatures, he suspected, were either created from the remains of the ancient residents of the city or, creepily, had actually been them once. The wraiths, as he called them, were much more unfathomable and dangerous. Their powers and behavior refused to abide by any sort of sense or logic. The Black Knight was one of these sinister revenants. That's why Sunny had trouble predicting his actions. Most of the time, the regal devil was content simply patrolling the grand hall of the ruined cathedral and killing anything that dared to come inside. Just like he had killed those poor fools. With a sigh, Sunny lay down on top of the support beam and, not paying any attention to the deadly height of his improvised resting spot, closed his eyes. He wanted to take a breath before continuing with his nightly errands. Soon, the sound of heavy footsteps informed him that the bastard had resumed his never-ending patrol. Good riddance. Despite the fact that nothing was disturbing his peace anymore, Sunny still felt strangely restless. His inner voice was in the mood to chat. Sunny, aren't you forgetting something? He frowned. What was there to forget? He was just catching his breath before going out again. He also had to wait for the right moment to scavenge through the possessions of these dead hunters. You just killed 6 people. Don't you feel guilty? Sunny was a little startled by this question. Curious, he listened to his emotions and came to the conclusion that no, he did not feel guilty at all. This was his 3rd time killing a human being. Granted, the first time happened inside a nightmare, where people were supposed to be simple illusions. However, Sunny wasn't sure that he believed in this theory. The old slaver's anguish had felt awfully real to be just a figment of his imagination. The second time, well, he didn't want to think about that. That happened in the castle, anyway, and that part of his life was over. The 3rd time was the cleanest of them all. Those thugs were going to rob and kill him, anyway. Sunny had seen through their intentions long before pulling on the invisible string and sending their leader into the cold embrace of death. He could have tried to run away, but they were very rude. If the thugs had insulted just him, Sunny might have tried to end the confrontation without bloodshed. However, they insulted Neffys. Bastards deserved to die. Despite the fact that his relationship with Changing Star had become strained, he still cared about her a great deal. Leaving the castle did not mean that he had forgotten their friendship. It's just that, there were more reasons to leave than to stay. With a sigh, Sunny summoned the beautiful bottle made out of patterned blue glass. This was the farewell gift that Cassie had given him before their parting. He cherished this memory very much. Bringing the bottle to his lips, Sunny took several sips of cold, delicious water and opened his eyes. He didn't want to rest anymore. Better to get moving. Before venturing out again, Sunny returned to his room and walked over to a large iron chest that was standing in one of its corners. Exerting some strength, he lifted the heavy lid and admired his treasure pile. Inside the chest, more than 100 beautiful soul shards were glowing softly in the dark. The sight of them always lifted Sunny's mood. Despite the fact that he himself had no use for the soul shards, they were still a valuable resource. Here on the Forgotten Shore, shards were a form of currency among the sleepers. 100 of them was an unimaginable amount. After a lifetime of being a pauper, Sunny was finally rich. Money, I have so much money. If a person wanted to live inside the castle walls, they had to pay a tribute of 1 soul shard every week. Those who could not afford it were forced to remain outside, living in a makeshift settlement just beyond the gates, which was often attacked by the monsters. Even so, they had to pay for food or go out and hunt themselves, which more often than not led to their deaths. With how much Sunny had gathered in these 3 months, he would have been able to live in the comfort of the castle for years, if he wanted to. Which, of course, he did not. Why would he pay for accommodations when he already had a palace of his own? One with no noisy neighbors and a fearsome guardian protecting the premises, no less. Putting 2 new soul shards in the chest, Sunny glanced at his dragon hoard one last time and closed the lid with a satisfied smile. Perhaps it was time to visit the castle again and buy a few things. No. He had already bought everything he needed the last time. Spending too many shards would make people doubt that he was as pathetic as everyone thought he was. Of all the sleepers in the castle, only 3 people knew that he was not just good at hiding in the shadows and avoiding danger. They were Neffys, Cassie, and Castor. That damn bastard. Thanks for watching.